and bed hair.
I wasn't going to say anything, George, to be honest. But
you all get worse. Do you know that?
This is lockdown hair. This.
I've got bed hair as well. Can you tell?
Right, 2 ticks.
Councillor Bellinger, you're here for the petitions. You're not subbing, are you?
No, it's just a petition, Mike, on Clay House.
Okay. Of course you're not. Of course you're not, because Councillor Holter's here. Sorry, I was being really dozy there.
Hi, Chair. We'll just give it another minute before we go over to the public site. I'll give you the nod when it's good to go.
Thank you. Is anyone else absolutely zoomed out? Good job, we've got a quick meeting.
Like Groundhog Day tonight, isn't it?
Certainly is. How are you, Councillor Young?
The speed of the meeting will depend on the skill.
Well, those petitions, we've already discussed them in scrutiny before when the provisional decisions were called in.
Hi, Chair. We're just off 6 o'clock now, so I'm going to put it over to the to the public site. So start the meeting whenever you're ready.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, we'll address that, Dave. Thank you, Kirsty. Right, we're at 6 o'clock, members, so we'll commence. First of all, welcome, members. Welcome as well, Fazana, to the officially to the place board, and the best of luck in your new role as well. Substitutes, Kirsty or Fazana, do we have any subs?
Yes, Chair, we do. Councillor Lee is substituting on behalf of Councillor Caffrey, who sent his apologies.
Perfect, and indeed welcome Councillor Lee to this meeting. Members' interest. Does any member have any interest about anything that we're about to discuss this evening? No. Okay, very good. Number 3, yes, we're live on YouTube. The public are permitted to the meeting. Number 4, the minutes of the previous meetings. You'll note that there's quite a few minutes here. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes first of all?
No, well, record, Chair.
Perfect, and I suggest we move them on block as well, and I second that proposal. Can we have all in favour? Yeah, and that's a majority passed. There we go. The minutes are passed. Now, onto the substantive items. We've proposed to jig things around a little bit. Let me just get my amended running order. So it is a long meeting, so we have proposed to move things around. May I propose that we take the petitions first, take the budget second, and then the capital programme at the end. And then, of course, the work programme, can't forget that as well. I think that should ensure, I've discussed with the Deputy Chair, and we think that that should ensure a better meeting, indeed. So we'll take them in that way. May I also advise the board that it's going to be quite a long meeting naturally, because there is a lot on the agenda. However, if we could all make our questions, comments as concise as possible, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'm sure officers and cabinet members will indeed return the favour as well. So thank you very much. And without further ado, we've got the first petition. We have Save Clay House. Now, Councillor Bellinger, is this you?
It is, yeah. It's me.
And then is it just yourself who's speaking, Councillor Bellinger, or?
I think it's just myself that's speaking on Clay House.
Perfect. In that case, Councillor Bellinger, I'll hand it over to you. That's okay.
Right. Thank you, Chair. As you're all aware, this particular issue has been battered about now for quite a number of months with regards to the mothballing of Clay House. Quite an iconic property within West Vale, within the ward of Greetland and Stainland. A grade 2 star listed building with some absolutely amazing gardens that surround it, which are meticulously cared for by 2 volunteers. This property has been used as a wedding venue over the years. It's hosted many meetings, ward forum meetings. It's also a war memorial. The building's actually become a war memorial because the memorial is actually inside the property. It's a very much a miniature of Shibden Hall, really, just without the furniture inside the property. And obviously, the community, not just residents of Greenlandstone, but residents of Calderdale would be saddened to actually see a building like this actually go or potentially get into the wrong hands. Hence the reason why this petition is in front of you today, because obviously people are passionate about retaining such heritage that we have. And the thing is with heritage as well, if we get rid of buildings like this, once they've gone, there's no retaining them, there's no getting them back into the hands of us as Calderdale. They've gone, that's it. What I would like to do today is I would like to appeal for your support really at this scrutiny board, and that is to put forward a recommendation to Cabinet, a recommendation that allows us some time. I'd like to see 12 months at least, maximum 12 months of time given to myself and our commercialisation team to look at putting a business plan together to capitalise on this property that we have and bring it back into use and generate income from this property as well, which is what we need at the moment within the authority. We need to look at many ways possible we can generate income, and this is an ideal opportunity for us to actually do that with a property like this. It's funny because I've actually been in a meeting this afternoon which is to look at a cycleway that's going to be hopefully put in place, and it actually runs literally within feet of this building, outside the door of this building. So that's actually going to generate more footfall to this particular area as well. So if this property was actually to be brought back into a commercialisation use, then obviously there's a bit more footfall there. And I don't know if I mentioned before, it's already the start of the Calderdale Way. This is the official start of the Calderdale Way. And that's something else really that we should be promoting within the authority, the walks that we have around Calderdale and starting at Clay House. So there's potential and there's opportunity for this building. So hence, I'm asking tonight that this is a way forward that we can look at, and that's give our commercialisation team that opportunity, that chance to put something together and bring it back at a later date. And let's make, let's generate income from this property. Let's save this property, the heritage that we have within Calderdale. So thank you, board, and I hope you make the right decision this evening on my plea to save this building.
Right, thank you, Councillor Bellinger, for that. May I suggest, before we go over to officers, I think it could be conducive to a good meeting to take questions, just 2 questions at a time first, and then we can go to either a cabinet member or Councillor Lynn or officers. I think that's a good way forward. So can I please take Councillor Young, and then immediately we'll go to Councillor Holdsworth, and then we'll go on to Councillor Lynn or officers. So Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that we note this petition. We've already discussed the possible saviour of Clay House, and I think at our meeting a couple of months ago, we suggested that maybe it should be asset transferred to the community. But we had a long discussion about it a couple of months ago before Christmas, so we'll move to note this petition. Thank you.
Right. You're always putting me in precarious positions, Councillor Young. Do we have a seconder for that proposal?
I'll possibly second it, but I'd be prepared to allow the discussion to go on for a bit beforehand, before I do make a decision on whether to second it or not. Okay.
Right. Yes. Perfect. Okay.
I'm not leaving Dave high and dry, but I recognise you've got a few questions to go before we go straight to any decision.
Okay. Yeah. Councillor Young, I've noted your proposal and I'll bring it up at a later stage, if I may. So Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to very quickly go through some thoughts that I've had. I wondered, Councillor Bellinger mentioned that Clay House is unfurnished, whether there would be the potential, whether or not we do a community asset transfer, to furnish some rooms with period furniture, perhaps from Bankfield Museum or on loan from other sources, and also do the same with contemporary paintings. Have a museum room with objects on display from the period, clothing, etc. Can look at Lotherton Hall near Leeds, very well visited, owned by Leeds City Council. Possibly house part of Stainland Library, which has been closed, in another room, maybe with a part-time volunteer librarian curator to oversee both rooms. There is an existing school visitors teaching area at the back of Clay House, which could be opened up again for schools when COVID ends. There could be a commercial let, wine bar, cafe area. I also think, and this may be something that members or officers of the council are already doing, would be to contact Screen Yorkshire and promote Clay House with location scouts. People will know, I'm sure, that Channel 4 are now in Leeds in the old Majestic nightclub that's been wildly refurbished. They're developing an awful lot of films for television in Leeds and the local area. And the northern film and TV industry is really booming. There's a lot of money to be made from tourism and from film in this area. And I think that's something that we could seriously look at. You could charge entry fees if the interior of the hall was done up in the way I've suggested, excuse me, with a Calderdale card for residents and a different charge for visitors. And I would say the park is the only open space in West Vale. There isn't anywhere else for people to go. And people tend to think maybe of Greetland and Stainland as a prosperous area. Well, I can tell you that the back streets of West Vale are anything but prosperous. And I think maybe we could find volunteers who would like to staff and look after Clay House, as they do in the Minster and as the National Trust does. And I just think there's so much potential that to let it slip out of the hands of Calderdale or the Calderdale residents into a private owner or a commercial venture, completely commercial, would be completely the wrong message at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Lynch, I'll let you direct the answers, if I may. Would you like to answer this, or would you like to direct it to someone else?
Whatever you want me to do, Chair. I'm happy to come back initially.
Yeah.
And first of all, just to say, I've got some sympathy with Councillor Young because we have discussed this quite extensively before, but nevertheless, I welcome some of the ideas that have been put forward here today. We have taken a decision, and this decision was in fact reviewed by Place Scrutiny, about whether we were going to reopen it as a functions venue following its closure under the pandemic. And we have taken a decision that we're not going to do that because at the moment, that is simply not commercially viable. However, we absolutely recognise what Councillor Horsworth, Councillor Bellinger, and of course Councillor Greenwood have all advanced, which is that it's a lovely Jacobean building. And it is certainly something that we would like to see very much continuing to be used for the benefit of the local community, which is why we have said that at some stage, if there is a group of people who would like to come forward and suggest that it be allocated to the community under our community asset transfer policy, then that is certainly something which could be looked at. Although I understand at the moment that there are some technicalities which are having to be worked through, really, so we can't actually move straight to that at the moment. I think as far as the point that Councillor Bellinger made in his opening remarks about the timing of this, all that we have said is that, you know, we would welcome opportunities and suggestions to come forward from any organisation that wanted to felt that they could make use of the building. He's asked specifically that it be considered as a kind of a commercialisation venture, and certainly that's something that we could go away and look at. But at the moment, I have to say that we are not minded to reopen the building. We've taken a decision about that, and we're happy to work with anybody else that's got ideas. I think, turning to what Councillor Horsworth said, I think some of those ideas about, you know, trying to interest Screen Yorkshire, about the ways in which you could make it into a visitor attraction are fantastic. They would all require money, and the question really would be, the moment we don't have that sort of money in the council, but the question would be, I suppose, whether there was any way in which that might come forward more easily to a community-based organisation or another special venture. Happy to take some more questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lynn. I'll take three at a time if I may. So I'll take Councillor Kavanagh first, Councillor Audrey Smith second, and Councillor Fenton-Glynn for third.
Hi.
So,
yeah, mine's a follow-on actually around just has the council explored any opportunities with English heritage? Because obviously, I mean, there's a feeling in the petition that we're trying to get rid of the venue for the community. We're not. It's just that the council can't own it. That doesn't mean it's not going to be around for the community to use and enjoy. So for me, it seems like it's a heritage opportunity. So just a question around, have we explored whether an organisation that really specialises in heritage would be interested in taking it on?
Thank you. And then can I go over to Councillor Smith?
Yeah, I think Jenny's Councillor Lynn's answered most of the questions. I think Councillor Holdsworth's suggestions were fantastic, and you know, I think if they could get together a business plan in the time that it is being, I suppose the question is around mothballing. What does that actually mean? Does that mean it's just out of use with no intention of going back into council use? And how long would something be expected to be mothballed until you know, future use was found?
Yeah, and Councillor Fenton-Glynn.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm quite sympathetic to this because I do understand that we want to kind of give people access to historic buildings like Clay House. I think a couple of things that would be really useful for either Councillor Lynn or the officers to give us an idea of for us to kind of be able to make a good decision on this is how successful is Calderdale at kind of monetizing our assets. It strikes me, I mean, there are a lot of good ideas from both kind of the petitioner and Councillor Holdsworth. It might be that we're probably not the best people to run a venue. And I'm saying this kind of almost from a consumer point of view, actually. So in 2016, when we got married, one of the things that we looked to do was to use as many local venues as possible, or kind of, you know, and we found that the council was kind of uniquely inflexible in that. I'm really sorry to say, like, you know, in terms of what we were able to do. And I think kind of thinking about that, when I think about some of the ideas that Councillor Holdsworth had, I think they're very good ones, but maybe it's worth looking at a different model to see how we can do that. So I'd just like to say, kind of like thinking across our kind of museum piece, what piece, where do we make money and where do we not in terms of commercialisation? Do we make money? I mean, I'd hope, although I would understand this year if we didn't, but that we're making money from Gibson Hall. But are we making money from, you know, from the Bankfield Museum? Are we, you know, or are we breaking even? And, you know, if kind of commercialisation's the aim, what other organisations are better at it, and who can we kind of partner up with and transfer the asset to in a way that kind of allows it to be open to people? Because I think, so I've got a little bit around the houses, but I'm just trying to get a better idea of what's working and what we can, do as a solution.
Okay, interesting question about privatisation there. I'm joking. Can we go for Councillor Dacre? You've mentioned in chat, and then I'll also bring in Councillor Lynn to finish off with any points that Councillor Dacre hasn't answered. Councillor Dacre.
Well, it was just in relation to specific points, really. Firstly, Councillor Kavanagh referred to Heritage England and whether they might be interested. I don't know whether any approaches have been made, but of course, English Heritage are a public sector body. I think Jenny's indicating no, Councillor Lynn's indicating no, but English Heritage are also a public body. They are also facing funding cuts. They're not in a position, really, I don't anticipate, to be helping out councils in looking after buildings. And I think at the moment, the Heritage Lottery Fund, for instance, is still frozen. So you can't even consider looking at that if you were trying to think of raising funds for doing new things with the building there. Which then, just moving on to the commercialisation that's being suggested. I think I've said before when I've been discussing these issues, the commercialisation people at the council, and they are an extremely small team trying to do an awful lot, that they were involved in the Future Council programme. And this was a decision taken in the course of the Future Council programme. So it's not as if the council has just gone ahead and made these decisions without thinking about some of these issues. But in terms of commercialisation, at the moment it's primarily making its money from being a wedding venue. It's, when you look at the figures, it's simply not making enough money to cover the costs of running it. If you tried increasing the amount you charged, which might seem like a commercial sort of thing to do, then you potentially drive customers away and you make even less money. Many of the other things, as has been indicated by Jenny, I think, or Councillor Lynn, if you do more things, it all costs more to do, and the council doesn't have it. Going back to the Heritage Lottery Fund, it may well be that if this building is transferred to a community group, they may have better access to some of those funds that could assist in doing more imaginative things with the building. But having talked to the commercialisation team, they're not just about making money, they're about trying to run council services in what you might describe as a business-like fashion. So actually looking at how much something costs and how much it makes, if it's even a service that makes any money at all. And if it's running at a loss, then you have to consider whether as a council you want to carry on subsidising it because you think it's a public good. And I would simply suggest that trying to run a wedding venue at a loss is not something that Calderdale or its residents want to subsidise. There are some things that council should subsidise, but that's, I'd suggest, not one of them, and it can be done better by other groups. So I think in terms of commercialisation, it's not as straightforward as you think. And in fact, actually, I suspect that the arguments would all stack up from commercialisation on the side of the decision that the council has made that we can't reopen, and all we can do is everything possible to support any group who can come forward and want to take it forward. And I think Jenny did touch on the timings, but you asked for 12 months, Councillor Bellinger, but I mean, we made this decision in October. No expressions of interest don't have to be made till the end of March, and then there is time to work up a detailed business plan. So from the time that the decision was made, there'll be a considerable period of months when people would have had the opportunity to explore all these options and work up proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you might have summed up most of the points there, to be honest. So I'm tempted to go on to the next set of questions, if that's okay, Councillor Lynn. So can I go to Councillor Dickinson, Councillor Lee, and I think I saw Councillor Greenwood might have made a comment in chat. Apologies if not. And then I've got some questions, but we'll deal with those three first. Councillor Dickinson, Councillor Lee, and then Councillor Greenwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo Councillor Fenton-Glynn's comments about the difficulty and relative absence of a can-do attitude of the commercialisation branch. Several years ago, Halifax Roundtable managed to get hold of Clay House for an event. It was a difficult one. More recently, we tried to get hold of the town hall itself, but that fell through. It just felt as though we kept on hitting reasons why not to rather than why we could. So I completely take on board Councillor Dacre's comment and also Councillor Lynn's comments with regards to the fact that it doesn't make viable commercial sense for the council to run it. I would therefore wish to put forward a proposal. If a community asset transfer is not going to be a successful way forward, that perhaps we might consider as a council leasing the building to a company that might feel as though they can make a commercial success of Clay House. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I go over to Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think that the petition demonstrates the strength of feelings that there are about the closure of this particular building. But there are other buildings in Calderdale which are proposed for closure, which have also generated strong feelings. I think that the points made by Councillor Bellinger and Holdsworth are reasonable ones. I think that we are acting hastily with a decision taken in October. And I won't go into the details now, but October and now are very different financially and things have changed. But anyway, a decision was taken then, and the purpose of this board is to discuss things. And I'm a bit disappointed that it's been said a couple of times, well, Cabinet's decided, so we're doing it. It doesn't really enter into the spirit of people signing petitions with over 1,000 people on that petition. So I think, if not 12 months, I certainly think we should just hang fire on the closure of the proposed closures of all of these buildings for 6 months at least, until we really have a clear plan for all of them. I don't think it's fair to shut them and say the decision's made, So let's stick with it. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Can I then go on to Councillor Greenwood as well? If Councillor Greenwood is in the meeting, I can't quite see her. No, I can't see her. Right, okay. So, oh, hello?
Yeah, sorry, it's Councillor Dacre. Councillor Greenwood was here. I saw her before, but she was under, she had Mike Lodge's name on her camera when I saw her.
Oh, that's interesting. Right, I don't know. Thank you, Councillor Dacre, for that. So, may I...
She's in hospital.
Is she? Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Can I pass on then to Councillor Dacre to respond to Councillor Fenton-Glynn's comment about the commercialisation element? I think you put that in the chat. And then can I ask for responses about Councillor Dickinson's question, and also I think it was more a statement from Councillor Lee.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. Well, I cannot give you an answer here on every asset that the council owns that it runs as a business. I'm just not in a position to do that. We'd have to go back to the officers and get a written answer to you, because I don't anticipate that any of them here tonight could give you an answer of that detail tonight. So it's a partial answer.
Okay, so I was just kind of looking, as I say, kind of broadly, you know, is it something that we tend to make money out of? Because I mean, if things are being held as a public good, it comes down to that question of, you know, what are the council here to do? You know, are we here to hold assets as a public good, or are we here to deliver services, basically?
Yeah, but that I suppose is why it goes back to the question about, yes, what is a public good? I know that it's a struggle, because it is a balance between trying to charge sufficient to cover your costs, say with a hall, and driving people away. So there's always that balance. But I think to sit here and go through everything like the Victoria Theatre or Bankfield Museum, I think's not necessarily the right thing for us to be doing tonight when we're discussing the petition about Clay House.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dacre. Then can we have a response to Councillor Dickinson's and Councillor Lee's comments?
Shall I come back? Would you like me to come back, Chair?
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah. Thank
yes,
you.
Indeed, and then perhaps I might, if you might like to call our Assistant Director Sarah Richardson or one of the other officers, perhaps, to see if they've anything to add, which I might not have included. But that's up to you. Yeah, first of all, I think the point about inflexible attitudes to venue management, I don't know whether that's the case, and I'm sorry to hear it if it is. But what I would say is that on the whole, I think our staff do a very good job in quite difficult circumstances. And I think that Councillor Dickinson's suggestion that if it wasn't possible to go for a community asset transfer, could the council consider retaining ownership and leasing it rather than disposing of it to a commercial operator, is certainly something that I think would be well worth considering. And I think if I could just say something here about our attitude to the community asset transfer situation, and some of the ideas which Councillor Holdsworth put forward about, wouldn't it make a fantastic museum, or wouldn't it be great if, like Shibden Hall, it could become an attractive location for which we could earn money and so on. I mean, those are all ideas that are worth thinking about. I agree, but what I would say is I think it's worth considering, for example, one of the other decisions which was taken in that future council's report related to our current ownership of the museum at Heptonstall, in the old grammar school at Heptonstall Museum. And although it's early days yet, I'm very pleased to say that we've had really positive approaches from both the parish council there and also from the historical society there, who've got some great ideas about how they could take that forward, and who are looking very seriously at thinking about a community asset transfer. So I would very much like to to encourage anybody, be that members of the local parish council, be that other people who are interested in the future of Clay House, to think about that. Because for me, my gut instinct is that if we could harness the goodwill and the interest and the entrepreneurial drive of local people to try to think about something like that, which could then secure funding in due course, perhaps, for whoever it was from the lottery or for anything else, then I think there's lots of things that could be done with the building. But I also think there's one final point that I would make, and that is that people will be asking for time. Now, I mean, in a sense, I think we've probably got time, because we don't know what the government is going to say about our current lockdown situation, but it could very well be later rather than sooner before people are able to take forward reopening venues, businesses, and that of all sorts, really. So I just think that in a sense we have got some time. We've indicated what the timetable is about wanting expressions of interest, and I would really, really encourage anybody that's signed the petition, that's in contact with the local councillors and so on, to think very seriously about whether they would be willing to put the work in to get them together, to try to take forward some of the ideas that have been put forward here tonight.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Lynn. Okay, I'm mindful that we're coming up to the 30-minute mark. May I briefly ask officers, if any officer would like to come in very briefly, then please do so. I'll then bring it on to Councillor Bellinger just to sum up very briefly, if I may, and then we'll take Councillor Young's proposal and any amendments that are forthcoming. So, officers, if you've got any comments.
Yeah. Can I come in quickly,
Yes,
Chair?
of course.
Yeah. I just wanted to give some reassurance to the board in terms of working with our commercialisation team, that we have had quite detailed discussions with our commercialisation team to actually look at, from their standard, and look at what the skills that they bring to it, to have a look at different ideas around Clay House and the art of the possible. And the view of the commercialisation team was that from the council's perspective, there's a significant capital investment would be required to enable us to take a commercialised agenda forwards. And so from that perspective, it wasn't affordable to us. But we did explore that. We didn't just decide to close it without exploring those alternative avenues first.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. Okay, Councillor Bellinger, do you want to sum up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the comments that people put forward this evening as well. There's quite a number of ideas there. Councillor Lynn, especially regarding leasing it, possibly, at least then we retain it as an authority. So at least we can ensure then that the property is then sort of like managed correctly and appropriately, I suppose, as well. I think really I found that some comments have been quite dismissive really about the future of Clay House, about the commercialisation of it. In the past, yes, I don't think it's been run effectively and efficiently in the past as a wedding venue. And I know that because I've actually spent time there and speaking to officers and speaking to people that have been running the place, and they've not really had the support that I think they should have been able to have had. So it could have been run better and probably generated more income. It's a fine building, ideal for weddings, and many other things that Councillor Holsworth said as well. There's many ideas out there that we could use, but it needs to be run better, and it needs that team of people in there to be able to run it better, and that's what we've missed. That's what that building has missed, I think, for many years. So I won't want to see us, just throw it away. I want us to sort of like at least try and do something with this, not to give up so early on it. So, I mean, I would like to speak to our commercialisation team. I've worked closely with them over the past couple of years on the review of various things. And Michael and Helen really come forward with some great ideas. And there's a fantastic report that they've put together recently that's gone to the leader of our council and Robin Tuddenham as well, with some of the work that they've been doing. So I have a lot of faith in our commercialisation team. And I think if we just give them that opportunity just to have a look at some ideas, give them that space, that freedom to look at ideas, then, it doesn't have to be 12 months. We could probably do it in a little bit shorter. Councillor Lynn said we've probably got some time anyway. So I think we should use that time, as wisely as we possibly can. And let's look at what we can potentially do with this building before disposing of it. I really, really do. So I do appreciate everybody's comments this evening. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Councillor Taylor, I know that you've asked that question. I think because it's not related to the subject matter of this petition, could you send an email after the meeting and copy me in, by all means, copy in a cabinet member or officer, and raise your question at that point? Is that okay? Because we've got quite a tight meeting, you see.
Oh, appreciate that.
Yeah,
when you get budget, it's
exactly.
Get your pillows. It was just to do with Shelf Village Hall and Library. We've got a similar thing going, and we've had 702 removed because of what's deemed to be a residency anomaly. So I'll do it on an email.
Yeah, and then copy me in, Councillor Taylor, and we'll deal with that at a later point. I think that's acceptable. Okay, so we've got a proposal on the table. Councillor Young proposes to note the petition, I believe. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fenton Glynn. Okay, do we have any amendments? Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Chair. I would, with the backing of Councillor Lynn's approval, would like to note some kind of amendment that would incorporate investigating the possibility of leasing the building, if in the absence of a community asset transfer, if a community asset transfer would deemed as an acceptable way of disposing of Playhouse.
Okay, so if a cat is not forthcoming, then we'd look at leasing. Councillor Lynn, what do you think to that?
Wait a minute. Chair, at the moment, what I have to do is to implement the decision which was made in the Future Council report, which is that we do not reopen it as a wedding venue, and that we then look at what the future of it is. So, in a sense, there's nothing. There's nothing in the what Councillor Dickinson has said that we wouldn't actually be open to looking at as well. I mean, clearly the building is in our ownership. We need to look at what its future is. We've indicated that we would welcome approaches for a community asset transfer, or if that is failing that, to look at other opportunities. And I'm sure that lease as well as disposal will be one of the things which we will be looking at anyway.
I think Councillor Young and I would be very happy to take on kind of, move to note with the understanding that the council will explore all possible ideas, including leasing, and I think, just in order that we kind of bring some words today, unanimity to the kind of response, so that we know that we're all on the same.
I think the only problem with that one, Councillor Fenton Glynn, is that that proposal we'd be proposing to explore all possible opportunity or all possible opportunities except from council running, because council have agreed to close it regardless of a successful cat. Would that's my interpretation, isn't it? Yeah,
correct.
So Councillor Fenton Glynn, does that amend your wording then?
Okay, I mean, if we could if we could finesse, and it might be Alex might have to be my representative and translator on earth for this one. Move to note with council, with that noting that Cabinet have undertaken to look into different forms of taking it off the books. Different forms or different ways of either asset transfer or leasing options.
Could we add to that, Councillor Fenton Glynn, about setting up a working party of councillors to look at commercialisation for council running? I mean, we're not losing anything, are we?
I'm not sure we can. I mean, in terms of what we're allowed to do, I don't think we can mandate them to set up a working party. I think that would have to be us taking a different decision. Mike, can you help me with the official technicalities, please?
So I'm really sorry, Councillor Fenton. Could you ask me the question again? Because
so I think we can either release the decision and we can release it kind of with a note or a suggestion or not, but we can't release the decision with a mandate that
it's not.
Set up a working party.
It's a petition. It's a petition, Chair.
Sorry, yeah.
It's a petition, Chair. So you can do. I mean, you actually, with all due respect, you can't mandate anything. You can only make a recommendation to Cabinet, but there are no constraints on what you may make a recommendation about with it being a petition. But so that's the technical answer.
So I'd like to build into this proposal about I'd like to invite members, any member who wants to take part, to form a working party and work with officers to see if they can find any solutions to keep this within council hands. I think Councillor Bellinger would form part of that working party, which he's mentioned. It's worth exploring, in my opinion. We're not going to lose anything from looking at it. So I'd like to incorporate that. Councillor Fenton Glyn.
I mean, I'm uneasy with setting up a separate working party. I mean, I'd be interested in the Cabinet members' reflections on this as well. But I think, I think there's nothing stopping people going away and doing some of that work. But the idea that, officers would be expected to kind of form part of that would obviously take up some of their time. And I guess there's, as we've just heard from Councillor Taylor, quite a number of different assets that we need to look at this for. I can see Councillor Lynn's got her hand up.
Yeah, Councillor Lynn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you for pointing out about the issue about resources. What I can say as the Cabinet member responsible for this is that I think it's been a good discussion this evening. I think there's been some excellent ideas put forward, and I think if your recommendation is that we note the report and encourage Cabinet to consider all possible options in terms of securing a good future for Clay House, I'm really happy at that. I'm not a big fan of setting up additional working parties because I think that there are a number of organisations, parish councils and others, I've mentioned Hepton Stall Museum and so on, where local people with the support of local councillors or parish councillors are prepared to get together and do the work of coming up with a business plan and deciding what they want to do. And I think that's fine. And I think if with respect, I think if Councillor Bellinger and other councillors from that area are really keen on this, then I think there's absolutely no reason why they can't get down to that, as other people in other areas are doing, and they will be given every support by officers in public services. I can assure them of that. But I don't think this is about us having another working party to look at the possibilities of commercialisation. For me, by all means, make the recommendation. It's in the gift of the panel of the board to make whatever recommendation it wants. But my advice would be to people that really want to do something about it, get on and do it, and we will help facilitate it. But I'm not particularly wild about ideas of working parties because, as has been pointed out, there are probably about 7 or 8 different buildings that we are currently, where we currently may have expressions of interest for community asset transfer and all the rest of it. And I simply do not believe it's fair to ask officers to get involved in additional work in working parties other than what they would be wanting to do anyway to support interested groups coming forward. That's my reaction, Chair.
Right. Let's move to the vote. We've had the discussion. I would also add that we did have this discussion in a previous scrutiny meeting as well, in quite depth, and I did raise my concerns at that point, so my concerns have also been raised. Right, let's move to the vote. So we've had the proposal. which Councillor Fenton-Glynn, so you are still adding your comment, aren't you, on the understanding that the council will explore options about leasing if a CAT is not successful? Yeah, okay. Right, so that's on the table. Do you have any amendments? No. Right. All those in favour of that proposal? Yeah. And all those against? Right, so that's a majority, so that's carried then, that proposal. Okay then, on to the second petition, if I may, which is relating to car parking charges. Which petitioner is speaking? Is it Councillor Baker?
It is, Chair, yes.
Of course, right. Over to you, Councillor Baker.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So I know parking charges is another topic which, if you've been on the council for a few years, you would have seen come up once or twice in the past. I mean, I recall that evening in, was it 2014? There was a vote of no confidence on the council over proposals to bring in evening charges in Halifax. So this particular issue of evening charges and parking is one that has been controversial in the past, and I'm sure it will carry on being controversial. So I'm sorry if members do feel like it's Groundhog Day, but I think when you do get a petition like this and you get hundreds of local residents, you know, signing a petition and voicing their concerns, then it is important to at least give those people who voice their concerns a bit of a chance to feel like their views are heard and that they are being properly considered and what have you. Sorry, just background noise to answer. So that's why, you know, it's come tonight. And really, I think the changes, I think we can all accept, you know, time and again, prices have to rise in line with inflation. Prices of everything goes up, doesn't it? And we all recognise that. But the reason I think this petition got so much traction was that it's a change in the parking schedule. It's introducing new charges at times where there weren't previously charges. And that, I think, has a much bigger behavioural impact in terms of the impact on shops and stuff than it does on just putting up charges across the board by 5p every year or 10p as you have to do to keep things going. So it's really that point. It's about the evening charges being introduced in Halifax, Hebden Bridge, Selby Bridge and West Vale. It's about the fact those evening charges aren't being introduced everywhere. I mean, why pick on West Vale but not Brighouse? It seems inequitable to those places that they're then going to have those evening charges. And it's also about the impact that then has on the hospitality trade. I mean, it is literally an industry and sector that's hanging on by its fingernails due to the furlough scheme at the moment. And we don't know when that furlough ends, what things are going to be like, whether people are going to want to come out again. And that risk of having those additional evening charges are going to be a real thing. I think a bit of a less concern about the bank holiday. You know, people do come in on bank holidays and it's probably not going to affect behaviour there. But really, you know, on weekday, those evening parking charges, I do think there's a real risk it's really going to put people off going out in the evening when we want people after this pandemic to get back into our town centres and be supporting those local businesses. So I guess the ask here, look, we're realistic. We know you have to put up parking charges, but maybe can you think about doing it across the board more equitably rather than the evening charges? So that's my ask of Cabinet, if you'll consider that. And even if you've already made up your minds on this one, then maybe next time round will you consider just doing it across the board a little bit rather and you know, more frequently rather than saving them up for a big charge and big changes.
Right, thank you very much. I'll go to Cabinet member first of all. Councillor Lynn, if you'd like to direct the discussion.
Yes, I'm very happy to. And what I'd like to do, if I may, Chair, is just briefly give some background about where this Cabinet decision came from and what is going to be happening about it now. But before I do that, I hope you'll bear with me if I say that I was disappointed and I think a bit offended really by the wording of the petition. I don't know who put the wording of the petition together, but I'm just reading from it now. It refers to as we start to come out of lockdown, we will need to do everything we can to support our businesses. Absolutely agree, and I don't think there's anything which our Cabinet has done which we could say has been against that. And it then goes on to say, However, our Labour Council is using this period during lockdown to sneak through extra parking charges in Calderdale. I found that quite offensive because we have always, as a Labour Council, been as open as we could be about any changes that we've had to make, whether it's to waste services or anything like that. We've tried to be open. So the idea that we were simply trying to sneak this through is wrong. And as I say, I consider it quite offensive. But let's just go back to the basics of it. What happened was that in March of last year, a report went to Cabinet, which was really triggered by a number of things. We'd had a local government peer review into our highway services, which had noted, among other things, that we actually have very, that our parking charges were relatively low. We'd actually wanted, as part of our work on, tackling climate change, to try to encourage people to shift to use of public transport, to get into our towns, to walk more, to cycle more. And that therefore means actually, to some extent, recognising that the car isn't necessarily king all the time. For all those reasons, a review and also the other point was that we hadn't actually reviewed the parking charge for some considerable time. So a decision was taken, and it's back last year, as I say, in the spring of last year, that we would move to introduce these 4 different charges as specified in the changes to charges as specified in the petition. And then we had the pandemic. Now, what happened is that a consultation was undertaken shortly, not that long after the Cabinet decision was taken. And the outcome of that consultation was due to be considered by the highways governing body, which is chaired by our Assistant Director Strategic Infrastructure, Stephen Lee, who I think is on the call and can answer questions if need be. Should you want him to, Chair. But having reviewed it and determined, and having reviewed the response to the consultation, has determined that there was no reason why we shouldn't go ahead with implementation. We've 3 times kind of looked at this, and on all occasions have decided that given the hit that our business has taken, and I entirely agree with what Councillor Baker says about hospitality industry, it has been tough, and it continues to be tough for people. We have decided that we are not at this stage moving to implement the Cabinet decision of last year. Now, that Cabinet decision is valid actually for 2 years under the quite complicated legislation, which Stephen Lee would be able to give a bit more detail about. But at the moment, and until the government determines what is going to happen and we begin to see what is happening to our businesses, it is the decision of the Cabinet, which I support, is clear that it is not appropriate to move to implement that validly taken Cabinet decision from last year. So I note the petition, and I think it's always good because it triggers a discussion here, and I look forward to having some discussion about it. But I'd like to give this reassurance and to any members of the public that are watching here that we have no intention of introducing changes to our parking charges. And in fact, people may recall that at the very beginning of the lockdown in March last year, for 2 or 3 months, we actually suspended parking charges simply because we were so worried about what was happening then. So that's all I'd say at this stage, and happy to take questions from members, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lynn. Okay, I indicated in the chat that I've got a question. Then we've got Councillor Young. So I'm going to put a proposal on the table at this stage. Why not? My proposal is, and I appreciate the Cabinet member's reassurance there. I think that's a pragmatic approach. I think given that this can be quite easily put back on the table, my proposal is to take the Cabinet decision off the table, to reverse it, until a time when we actually do need to make this decision to increase parking charges, and then to launch a review into car parking charges. Specifically, the review should focus on how parking charges should be amended to stimulate town centre footfall. So that's my proposal. Number one, to take this, the cabinet. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lee. So the cabinet should take this decision off the table and launch a review on car parking charges, specifically how amended car parking charges can stimulate town centre footfall. Councillor Lee has seconded that. Thank you, Councillor Lee. I'll go to Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I cannot support that. So Jenny actually clarified the situation whereby the decision was made by Cabinet. It was called in to this scrutiny board. We had a full discussion back in September time, I think it was, on this, and it went back to the Cabinet and it was released for implementation. Now the petition's come in, and as Jenny has actually said, the original decision hasn't even been implemented because of COVID-19. I think we should just note the petition.
Thank you.
Yeah, I second that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Young and Councillor Kavanagh. No problem. Okay, so we've got Councillor Lee and Councillor Holdsworth. Can I take both of you at the same time?
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all say I agree with Councillor Jenny Lynn definitely on one thing, that this has most certainly not been sneaked through by the ruling group. We've spoken about it on several occasions, as Councillor Young has said, but that doesn't make me agree with it. The proper procedure has been followed and it is being followed, but I think we should delay this implementation. That's why I've seconded the Chair's proposal in view of the desperate state of the High Street, not just in Calderdale, but in Britain. And we need to do everything that we can to encourage footfall and really give the businesses the best chance. And I think this is an easy way of demonstrating that as a council, cross-party, we're all in agreement that we want to try to get ourselves going again with the economy. So I think it's an easy fix that will benefit Calderdale throughout the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I'd like to also echo your points that I do believe due process has been followed. Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Chair. My point was actually going to be an argument about the problems of parking charges at night, driving people to park in areas like West Vale on side roads and creating a nuisance for residents. But I think given Councillor Lynn's comments about this not being implementing at this point, I've nothing further really to add. So thank you.
No problem. Can I go then to Councillor Fenton Glynn?
Yeah, I'm just a bit disappointed that we're here again. I mean, the fact is that, you know, this hasn't been implemented for the reasons that we all know, but there's a local election coming up, so we've got a petition about parking, and the kind of lie to why this has come is given by the fact that it's not members of the business community who presented this petition. There's not a large number of people watching it. I think I just checked on YouTube, there were 9 people watching it, and one of them's me. And we are here talking again about parking, and of course no one wants to spend extra money on parking, but actually if we're going to talk about the nighttime economy, then I'll be honest, last time I went out in Halifax, and it has been a while because I've got a 2-year-old and there's a pandemic on, but I spent considerably more than 60p, which would be the extra that I pay on the parking. And I think we need to have a holistic approach to the nighttime economy, something that we've discussed in this committee again and again. But we're going to go on after this to talk about the budget, and we're going to talk about some pretty tough decisions. I'm just looking through, you know, what savings can we make on the adult mental health service, and, you know, what are we going to do about how well we pay our staff. And when it comes down to it, I can't, in good conscience, put back a already agreed amount of money that we're going to bring in through the parking revenue, and then have to subsidise highways with that money and find that money from somewhere else, because this is a really difficult time. And I know it's nice to have in your local election leaflet that you stood up against parking charges, but we're better than that. And I just can't believe we're here again. So I'm going to support Councillor Young's motion. I just hope we all can.
Perfect, thank you. We're on a flow. Let's go to Councillor Dickinson. That's the final question.
Thank you, Chair. Listening to Councillor Fenton Glynn, I think there's a point to be made that truth of the matter is, even for old dolts like me who like to go out for a drink, parking in town is not really the issue in question, because you've got to find alternative ways of getting about anyway. Nonetheless, I would be interested, and I'm going to be sort of, perhaps not unsurprisingly, backing up your initial proposal, Councillor Robinson. And I'm just mindful of the furore of the introduction of parking charges in Brighouse, and the initial feedback, which honestly needs more analysis and is tainted by subsequent events of last year with the pandemic. The damage, the initial anecdotal reports were that business was damaged by the introduction of car parking charges, and the question has to be asked is that the loss of earnings by local businesses and the impact that has on business rates, is that offset? That is to say, is there a business case for the introduction of parking charges that will raise more revenue in excess of the losses of the loss of business rates as a consequence of the drop in businesses? But as I say, the point really is that the extension in nighttime evening parking, I don't think it's going to be a massive fundraiser personally. Thank you.
Of course, the council aren't allowed to implement car parking charges for the purpose of raising money. I think it's just worth adding that. Councillor Lynn.
It's moot, yeah.
Yes, I was just going to clarify that actually. That the point that I think the point that Councillor Fenton Glynn made was that he was concerned if we were in a situation where we were effectively committing ourselves to taking away potential revenue to offset the costs of our highways services, because that and therefore having to put money in from other difficult budget areas to prop up that highways budget. I think that was the point that he was making, and I think that I think that what I would say, Chair, is that I think that it's interesting what you were talking about in terms of reviewing how we could, how parking charges could be reviewed to encourage footfall. What I do think is that going forward, we're looking forward to some real investment, hopefully coming, and capital investment that will improve the look of some of our towns in Calderdale, and with some grant funding coming in to do that in due course. And I think that'll be absolutely fantastic. And I'm quite sure that as part of that and as part of that work, there will be further work which will have to be done to consider where's the parking going to be, and how's it going to be, and how's it going to be charged for. But what I would say is that to reassure you, and obviously members of the board will need to decide what they want to do about your proposal in due course, yours and Councillor Lee's proposal in due course. But just to reassure you that we are all trying to pull together to support our businesses as best we can in this really difficult time. And I'd like to just as an aside, I'd like to pay tribute to our the staff that have worked their socks off trying to get support out, the business grant support out to people, and they've worked incredibly hard recently. So it's not that we're not sympathetic to that, and it's because of that we are not proposing to implement this at the moment. But on the other hand, it does form part of the financial framework in which we're trying to operate. And so we do have a decision. That decision does stand, and I would hope that it will stand, but that in any event, if it's not implemented within 2 years from the date when it was taken, then effectively it lapses anyway. So it may, and I don't know what the timescale of lifting the lockdown is going to be or anything else. But just to give you that reassurance that it's got 2 years from the time when it was originally determined. There's various processes that have to be gone through, which Stephen Lee can advise if need be, should you want. But we're not rushing to implement these at the moment, no way, because we do recognise that we've got to do right by our businesses and particularly in the hospitality trade. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, so Councillor Kavanagh, I think it might be more of a comment than a question, I'm not sure. And then depending on if it is a question or comment, we'll go to Councillor Baker just to sum up, and then we'll move to the vote.
I think Councillor Lynn has made it really perfectly clear that our ultimate priority right now is supporting businesses. So I think we can be confident that that is what the Cabinet is going to do. But in the future, when COVID is over, we have got an absolute priority around climate change. And whilst it might raise a little bit of money, I mean, we're talking about for 2 hours from 6 till 8, we're talking about £1.60. So, per car. Actually, for me, the priority isn't getting that money in. The priority is getting people out of their cars, getting people on trains and buses and bikes. And if they want to go into Halifax or any of those areas, we need people to be doing active travel, and that's for people's health, for the climate, for the benefit of the community. And all these, we've got so many exciting plans that are coming in around active travel. The plans in Toberdon, plans in Halifax. There's going to be a whole infrastructure that relates to active travel. And so for me, once we've got to a point of real recovery, we have to get people out of cars.
Yeah, thank you very much. Trust me, Councillor Cowan, I've tried to cycle. I've tried. Councillor Baker.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'm sorry if the language sneaked was in any way offensive. It's just a common phrase used in politics. One only has to look at the Labour Party's own set of press releases, and they often use the phrase the government is sneaking out this or that. It was used at that time, actually, because we won't have any council meetings within lockdown. So there was no real ability for opposition groups to raise this as a question at council or in any way. So that was the point that I was making. But by doing it within lockdown at a period in time when the council wasn't meeting, it felt like it was difficult to oppose it. You couldn't go out and do a petition on the ground. You couldn't campaign on it. So, it's just back and forth, typical use of political language. And I'm sure next time I read a Labour leaflet, it'll be saying the Lib Dems are sneaking to do this and that. And it's no personal criticism. It's just the language of politics. I'm glad to hear that the proposals aren't going forward at this point in time, and you've had the wisdom to listen to things like this petition and the consultation and feedback and listen to the hardship the hospitality industry is facing. So I can see why Councillor Robinson put forward his proposal to get it taken off the table, because whilst that decision is in place, it could then be implemented at any point in time. So I guess all we can really do is kind of plead with you that when you do come back to look at this, that you do take on board that point I raised about maybe you're better off just raising everything a little bit across the board rather than bringing in a sudden new charge in an evening or something like that at a time where, then we're trying to get the nighttime economy going and places back open again in the evening, because it is going to be tough, when those bars and restaurants and other kind of like nighttime activities like the cinema open up. People, they're going to have every little bit of help they can to get their business going again to make up for all their lost revenue. So hopefully you'll bear that in mind, and I'm sure you will do. On the active travel, I do get that, but at the same time, we're hoping that cars will become a lot greener. They are becoming greener all the time. Less emissions on every new car you buy, and people will soon be transitioning to electric vehicles, which won't have the same problems with emissions. So that parking issue isn't going to go. There's still, even if you have all electric vehicles and they're green vehicles, then there's still going to be that issue around how much you charge people for parking. And I'm much more a fan of the carrot approach to active travel rather than the kind of punitive spending money, putting up barriers or making it so prohibitively hard for people to travel about, that they're forced to switch to other methods. I'm much more in favour of making it easier for people to travel and trying to make it as easy as possible to find, good, sustainable ways of travelling about. But anyway, so thank you for allowing us to submit the petition. I think it's a good thing we've got this scheme where petitions do get debated like that. I think it's good for democracy, and we need to do all we can to have schemes like this at a time where, so much of democracy is hurt by the lockdown.
Agreed. So, thank you very much. And I echo those points about the petition scheme. Okay, let's go to the vote. So we've got my proposal, seconded by Councillor Lee, which is, I think if we're not using the decision, take it off the table. And the council should launch a review into how we can amend car parking to support the post-COVID town centre. Let's wrap it in cotton wool. That's what I think. The amendment is from Councillor Young, seconded by Councillor Kavanagh, which is to note the report. We'll go to the amendment first. All those in favour of the amendment? Right, Councillor Fenton-Glynn, I should have done this the first time. Councillor Fenton-Glynn, Councillor Brian Smith, Councillor Young, Councillor Kavanagh. All those against? Councillor Audrey Smith, not sure I mentioned. All those against? Right, myself, Councillor Lee, Councillor Dickinson. Right, abstentions. There we go. Councillor Holdsworth. So that passes. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah, that passes. There we go. Mike, does this then become the substantive proposal?
Yes. Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. So becomes a substantive proposal. All those in favour? Councillor Young, Councillor Brian Smith, Councillor Audrey Smith, and Councillor Kavanagh. All those against? Councillor Lee, Councillor Dickinson, myself. Abstentions? None. Okay, so that passes. Councillor Young's proposal passes, or the amendment. Perfect. Sorry, brain fade right now. It's going to be a long meeting. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Baker, for the petition. And I'm seeing a lot of weary faces on Zoom. So, yeah. So thank you, Councillor Baker.
No, thank you, Chair. And I'll leave you to the rest of your meeting in peace, and I'll go try and get my kid to bed now. Great. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, then on to the budget, if I may. Which cabinet member / officer is taking this?
I would imagine I will probably and may defer to Nigel Broadbent if there's any really technical questions.
Of course. Could I just double check, Councillor Dacre, and indeed possibly a scrutiny officer? Is it only the place matters that we're discussing here, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Councillor Dacre, if you'd like to take the lead, and over to you.
Oh, well, I would also say that Councillor Scullion may well want to add to things, but I think really I don't want to take up much of your time, but I would just want to remind everybody of the background to this, that we've just been discussing these petitions which relate back to the future council process, which we started last year because we were so concerned about our financial situation. We were uncertain as to what money we were going to receive from the government for COVID costs. We already had 10 years of previous cuts to cope with. We were having to make in-year cuts already. And we decided that we had to take some steps at that stage to find some savings, partly so that those savings would be full year savings in 21-22. So when it's come to time for the budget, in some senses, we've done quite a lot of the heavy lifting. We've already made some very difficult and painful decisions, and that has removed the need to make quite so many decisions in the budget. Now, in terms of our financial situation, it is the case that we, compared to when we started on the Future Council process. We did receive more money from the government. That's enabled us to get through this year and get to the end of it without going broke effectively. But it hasn't been a complete payback to us, in the sense that it's never going to recompense us for all lost income. They're only ever going to pay a percentage of that, and that includes things like lost parking fees, but also our irrecoverable council tax and business rates losses. So those are losses that we are going to have to somehow find. And when we were looking at the future council, we had the medium-term financial strategy, which suggested that we could be looking at a deficit for next year of anything between 8 and 20 million. And the MTFS stated, in the best case, that is £8 million, additional savings would be needed. Now, it's marvellous that we have actually come in looking at a deficit for next year of at the lower end of the scale that was forecast at about 8 million. But nevertheless, it's still 8 million. We've still got to balance the books. We've got a legal obligation to do it. And so as a responsible council, we've got to find those savings. So that's the context in which this budget is put to you. Of course, we have priorities that we want to embed in everything that we do: tackling the causes of inequality, tackling climate change and the climate emergency, and encouraging our towns to thrive. And so when we've been looking at future council decisions and in the budget, we've tried to keep those principles at the heart of the decisions that we've made. But I've said this before, but councils are in a situation now where they have cut all the fat. They're not just cutting down to the bone, they're scratching around looking for the marrow in the bones, because there really is no slack left. So the cuts that are being made are ones that cannot be made without impacting upon our residents. And they're not cuts that we want to make, but as I say, we have a legal duty to balance the budget, and so we have to face up to these difficulties and make those decisions to ensure that the council can continue to provide services. I could say a lot more, but it's already 7:20, and I'm sure you'll all have other questions and comments that you'd like to make. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Dacre. I'll go straight to questions. But by my reckoning, here we're just reviewing page 33, which is the HWRCs, and page 35, which is the Future Council Programme, which I suspect that obviously involves an element of place in there. So, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Just some comments on the process, if I may, and I will be brief. The proposals were only released on the evening of the Cabinet meeting. Clearly, they'd been prepared beforehand. And I just make the point that it's very difficult to read these papers for all of us, but particularly for opposition parties. To read these papers, fully research them and understand the budget that's being proposed, because all of the ruling group have had some ample time to see them and understand them and debate them. So that makes it more difficult. If we want a democratic situation that's transparent, it would have been helpful if it could have been released earlier so we could comment on it. And the other thing is, I don't know if this is the usual thing, but this time the leader said he was not prepared to invite anybody else to speak at the Cabinet meeting. And I was disappointed about that as well. But, you know, there's plenty of disappointments in politics, but a lot of the time we do cooperate with this council and the leaders and the leading group. And I think, you know, it's almost as if these are deliberately being put in the process of constructive debate and discussion, and I am disappointed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I might as well ask, shall I ask my question now, Councillor Dacre? Do you want to take that now?
I may as well answer that now.
Yeah.
I've only been cabinet member for resources since the middle of the year, so I haven't been a cabinet member in a budget council in a budget process before. But my understanding is that the budget document like that is always released on the evening of the meeting. That is perfectly standard practice and has been happening for years. And it is simply the start of the consultation process, which ends in February. So there is ample opportunity for both residents and other councillor members to scrutinise the budget. You have the opportunity to come here to the scrutiny panels. Each scrutiny panel has a session where it deals with the budget proposals. So it is an open and democratic process. There are no barriers put in your way. And again, I think at the meeting where the issue about making comments during the cabinet was raised, that was advice. It wasn't a random decision of the leader. It was the advice that was given by the Director of Legal and Democratic Services that that's the appropriate course of action for that particular topic in the cabinet on that particular cabinet date. So I absolutely refute the idea that there are barriers being put in the way of scrutinising the proposals.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Dacre. So my question is specifically related to page 33, Suez. My question is, so reducing hours, reducing staff. Every year and I think including this year as well, for the household waste and recycling centres, we redeploy staff to bolster the collection service, essentially. My question, therefore, is: are we cutting it a bit thin if we are reducing the amount of staff at our household waste centres, and then when it comes to Christmas time, we're not going to have any staff to redeploy? So that's my first question, just about how this will work at times of increased waste. The second question is relating to how many staff members are we actually forecasting will be at risk of redundancy here in terms of Suez? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Chair, would you like me to try to answer
yes, Councillor Lynn, yes, thank you.
As that's my special subject. Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's interesting what you said about flexibility, the need for flexibility at high demand times, and of course, as we know, this particular period during the pandemic has been especially difficult, with people doing getting a lot more cardboard that needs disposed of because they're having stuff delivered online and so on and so forth, as well as the increased amount that needs to be disposed of and recycled. At Christmas, you're absolutely right. What I can say is that we understand. I mean, obviously, we don't directly employ the staff who deliver this service. We have contracted that service out to Suez, and the question about how many staff will be affected by these changes will be one for Suez to determine, no doubt, in negotiation with their trade union representatives. We don't anticipate it, however. I think I can say that if the budget is passed and the decision is taken to support the council's budget on the 22nd of February, then we have indicated to Suez that we would expect them to move towards a system of 5-day operation of our HWRCs. So they would always be open at the weekends, which is obviously a very busy time when many people are free to visit the household waste recycling centres. But that we would then look at some of the other days of the week, when perhaps in the middle of the week when they're not quite so busy, we would look at actually having a bit of a rota closure. And we think that would actually create savings in what the council has to pay Suez for the delivery of that service, and that's what enables us to contribute the savings that we are contributing. So I do sympathise with what you're saying. It's like anything else where you're making a saving, something has to give. But we will. All I can do is give people assurances that public services will do their very best to try to minimise the inconvenience to the public, and hopefully Suez will do their best to minimise any impact on staff, perhaps to redeployment or what have you. But that is for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lynn. If I may, it's very related, so I might tag on one question quickly, and it might be a bit commercially sensitive, so I've got to go around the houses, but just to warn you, so we don't need any specifics. But I'm wondering the extent to which, if we're having to redeploy staff which are possibly not working, or it might even rely Suez to rely on contractors themselves, who knows, I don't know. To what extent is there any penalty clauses within the contract? And what I'm getting at is, if we have to, or if we incur a penalty as a result of taking on additional staff at a time of need, my question is, that penalty could quickly erode this budget saving. So I'm just wondering if that's been taken into account.
What I may actually invite Andrew Pitts to kind of speak to that. But what I would say is this: that we wouldn't have put forward this as a potential saving had we not checked carefully that we are within our rights to have a contract variation, provided it's less than there's a particular threshold. And that would be part and parcel. It's within the existing contract, so we don't anticipate that we would be incurring liabilities. And you're quite right. It could to some extent be commercially sensitive. But if you want to ask Andrew Pitts if he's got anything else he wants to add to what I've just said, by all means.
Thank you, Councillor. And it's just mainly to the extent of, if I can invite Andrew into the discussion, just if we're redeploying staff, to what extent would there be a cost incurred? I appreciate it's a technical question, by the way, so it might need to go back to the...
But just while Andrew's appearing, because he's taking...
He's here.
Okay.
Do you want me to answer that? Or
yeah, Andrew, and again, I appreciate it might be a bit too difficult for this online discussion.
Well, if I could just maybe seek a little bit more clarity on that, but if I can just deal with the points that you've made a little bit earlier and just back up some of what Councillor Lynn has said. I just need to make it clear that the only time that staff have been redeployed from household waste sites to bolster the curbside collection has been when the household waste sites have been closed. So that has always been only been during the time of COVID. It is not something we would do as a matter of course. So there is no sort of threat to curbside capacity, if you like, from this proposal. Essentially, the household waste sites will operate exactly as they are, with the same staffing levels, but only for 5 out of 7 days of the week. And Councillor Lynn's alluded to how we would hope that would happen, and it's clearly sensible to open on the busiest days, which tend to be weekends, and look at closing on the less busy days. In terms of the potential sort of redundancies, if you like, the saving that's in there is not all from staff costs. There are other operational savings that will accrue from only operating on 5 out of the 7 days. But very roughly, it will probably be between 3 and 4 staff. Obviously, those are not council staff. They are Suez's staff. And of course,
you know, we would hope that Suez will act as a responsible employer in exactly the same way as Calderdale Council does, and would seek to give any of those staff priority in terms of redeployment to elsewhere in the organisation. And indeed, in Calderdale, there are often times when Suez have to bring in agency staff to deliver the service, to cover, you know, various operational issues. And we would argue that there's an ideal opportunity for those staff to be redeployed and used instead of Suez bringing in the agency staff. So that's just my comments on what you've said so far. Now, in terms of the varying the contract and redeploying staff and things, I wasn't really sure what you meant by that, Councillor Robinson, because obviously as I've just said, any redeployment is nothing to do with Calderdale Council. It is essentially a matter for Suez and to redeploy staff within their own organisation.
That's interesting. I'm mindful I don't want to take up too much of the place board. It's just mainly, so when we, I naturally suspect that our contract for roadside collections stipulates a capacity or a certain quantity or a certain number of lorries on the road, or there's some kind of measurement there. So my question is, I mean, you did mention as well that staff aren't redeployed onto the roadside collection service from household waste centres. And is that every year? Because I thought there were.
No, as a matter of course, we wouldn't redeploy staff out of the household waste sites unless there were particular issues. One example, well, obviously I've given the example of COVID when the sites were closed, and it obviously made sense to help out with the additional tonnages that we were seeing as people were in the first lockdown as it was. But also another example is I can remember during the 2015 floods, for example, which was actually under the last contract, but because it was such a priority to get some of the flood related debris off the streets, we actually did ask Suez to move some of their staff out onto street side collections, but it would only be in exceptional circumstances like that. Suez are, and I know this is probably a prickly issue at this moment in time for many members, but Suez are meant to deliver a Monday to Friday curbside collection that collects weekly recycling from all properties in Calderdale and fortnightly refuse collection, and the contract is meant to be adequately resourced to deliver that. And there are, and I know you've not got time to go into this, but maybe things that are returned to later, there are penalty clauses in the contract if they don't meet certain levels of performance on that curbside collection. That's interesting. The contractual setup, it's a bit of a different way than I thought it would be set up, but that's really interesting. So thank you, Andrew, for that. That's really, really helpful. Can I go on to Councillor, I'll take board members first. So I'll go on to Councillor Fenton Glynn.
Sorry, I just turned my camera off rather than turning my microphone on there. I guess so. Again, this is one of those things where everyone lives in a world where we'd rather it didn't happen, but we also live in the real world and accept that we're going to have to cut our cloth in some ways. And if we are looking at waste and recycling, I mean, this seems like the most sensible and fairest thing to do in terms of just what, you know, where you can save money on this contract. So, I mean, I guess my question would be, just to kind of get councillors thinking, is what kind of alternatives would there be for saving money in the waste and recycling budget? Because I mean, the ones I can think of, you know, kind of so closing individual sites or, you know, cutting back collections and things like that would, in my view, be less desirable. But I'd just be interested, kind of, yeah, what are the options apart from asking Suez to not charge us as much for the contract that we already have, which I suspect would get a very short, quick answer. And you know, I just know what you've considered, and I think, you know, once we've got that idea and the idea of the range in which we're working, I'd be interested to see if other councillors agree that you've probably taken the best decision.
Interesting. Can I bring in? Is it Councillor Lynn or Councillor Lynn? This is your remit, is it?
Can be either of us, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. Who fancies it?
But yeah, well, I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy to hear what to follow up on what Councillor Fenton Glynn has just said there, which is that, you know, by all means, you know, that's the whole purpose of this scrutiny board looking at the budget. If any members of this board have got other ideas of other savings, which would result in an equivalent saving, then by all means, let's hear them. I mean, that's the whole point of about a consultation. But at the moment, I have to say that I would endorse what Councillor Fenton Glynn has said, that we thought about a whole number of options, you know, including, you know, reducing or eliminating the Land Rover collection service for remote areas, going to 3 weekly collections, and so on and so forth. And for all of those reasons, we reviewed them all and came to the conclusion that the least damaging way in which we could realise the savings, which all directorates have had to make, as Councillor Dacre has indicated the reasons why, was to go with this one. So that's all I would say to Councillor Fenton Glynn. But you know, obviously, if members of the board have got other ideas of things, then that's an entirely appropriate thing to do at this stage, because that's what budget consultation is all about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Dacre.
Yes, it was just to add really that a careful reading of the introduction to the budget from the leader will have shown you that he referred to the fact that we are going to be working with the community, with the residents, on reviewing the waste and the landfill and the recycling issues, trying to increase our recycling and above all reduce our landfill, which, as he notes, costs us £100 a tonne to dispose of. So that is a completely unnecessary cost to us and to the council, who of course then have to try and recoup it from council tax holders. So everything every individual household can do to reduce the amount of landfill reduces the council's costs. And
how many tonnes do we usually produce?
So Andrew may know the answer to that. I certainly don't.
That feels like a question
Andrew will know.
Sorry, Chair. What was the exact question?
How many tons? Yeah, go on, Josh.
Just kind of, I mean, you don't have to give me an exact figure, but a kind of ballpark of how many tons of landfill, or kind of how much do we spend on sending waste to landfill a year?
Okay. There are two things in there. It's not all landfill. Don't think of waste disposal as being landfill. 10, certainly 15 years ago, the majority of waste was disposed through landfill. It is now very little, and Calderdale is one of the best performing authorities. We send less than 2% of Calderdale's waste to landfill. So less than 2% of what is produced in Calderdale ends up being buried in the ground, which is great. The figure of £100 per tonne refers to the cost of disposal through a variety of means. Basically, of anything that we can't recycle, the ballpark figure is it's £100 per tonne for that to be onwardly processed by the disposal company that we have. It's probably not a commercial secret unless somebody tells me to be quiet. I think you can probably look it up, but our waste disposal contract is in the region of about £5 million. So if you do the sums, it's about 50,000 tonnes a year, very broadly, that's produced in Calderdale. I always do it on something like, as you can probably tell, Chair, I can talk at length on this particular issue, but I always calculate that on average, each household in Calderdale generates about half a tonne of waste a year. So, you know, we've got about 94,000 households, about half a tonne each. We're around 50,000 tonnes of waste a year.
Do you mean half a tonne of non-recyclable, of waste?
Yes, of waste as opposed to recyclable material, of waste that has to be either landfilled or incinerated or disposed of in some other way.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I was right if I repeat that I don't get it wrong.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Kavanagh.
Am I allowed to ask a question that isn't about recycling and waste?
As long as it's on the future council programme, then yeah.
So
go on, over to you.
I'm just interested in it's around the introduction. So in page 2, the kind of preamble talks about the targeted help for those who need it and mentions the Never Hungry Again campaign, which is obviously really important. And I just wondered at what stage we were at identifying those other things that need to be done for people who will need it post recovery, and what that is looking like, and how it will be, I suppose, identified, the priorities in communities.
Yeah. Councillor Dacre?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I think the only other thing that's specifically mentioned in that introduction is the fact that they were retaining the council tax reduction scheme at the same level, so that all those people, and many of whom will only have lost income during the pandemic, will still get the support at the level that we've had it at for the last few years, whereas we could have reduced that. So that's one thing. I think in a way, I suppose the trouble is that I, as member for resources, am not necessarily the best person to answer that question as to what other steps are going to be taken, because it's not, the particular programmes are not going to be within my field. What I can say, just in general terms, is that there are groups within the council that are working on COVID recovery, and the sorts of things, part of the sorts of things they're having to look at is what impact it's going to have on household budgets and how we deal with that. And a lot of that's going to be about working with the voluntary sector, partly to try to cover things that the council can no longer do, but at the same time recognising that the environment for the voluntary sector is also extremely challenging. But I'm, as I say, I'm not in a position necessarily to give you any more specifics, but it's really something that's being built into everything that the council is trying to do to recover from the pandemic. And I think, so for instance, I mean, one of the things that I can say is that we're making these various bids or have gained money from the government for these various projects, like the Towns Fund, and partly because the government put it in as a late criteria, but also because we want to do so. When we're putting those bids in, we are specifically referencing COVID, the impact that that's had on, so for in my case, on Todmorden, the impact it's having on deprivation, and the ways in which the projects that we're putting into our Towns Fund, we think will help deal with some of those issues by perhaps, for instance, enabling better skills to be provided to young people, so that they can have a better chance of obtaining jobs, and that the jobs that they obtain are better paid, and that they don't have to move away to try and do that. So in that sense, we're building it in those ways. Whenever there's an opportunity, we will try to take it to ensure that we can do everything we can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smith, and then I'm mindful to move on, because I think we've fleshed out some quite good discussions there. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you. What is this is back to recycling. It's a bit of a pet favourite of mine as well. What is the council, is there anything in the budget to promote recycling in terms of bigger things like, you know, settees and sofas and like that, to connect up because I know that now the charity shops have been closed. I reckon that's been had a huge impact on the amount of stuff we've seen fly tipped. But you know, there is free cycle. There are all sorts of initiatives that need to be promoted, because I just think that some communities just do not embrace that at all. And you know, they complain about the amount of fly tipping, and they're the objects that we see mostly lying around, you know, things that possibly could be reused. And I know I'm not quite sure how that fits in with your half a ton of waste, but thanks.
Yeah, over to which cabinet member would like this, or is that councillor?
Sorry, Jenny. Sorry, Councillor Lynn. I'll let you go.
Well, no, I think that's a very interesting point that Councillor Smith has made. what I can say is that we are hoping very much, and I think Andrew Pittswell may be able to confirm this to me. We know that one of the things that we're hoping that Suez will do is they have got a vacancy for a recycling officer to promote recycling, and we hope very much that post is going to be filled very soon, and that person will be able to continue working. The council will, of course, continue its work in trying to promote recycling, and a great deal of work has been done and continues to be done when the schools are open in encouraging kind of educational measures in schools and so on. As you know, I think your point about some of the other ways in which people can exchange, can exchange items via things like Free Cycle. I think that's very interesting, and I think perhaps that's something that Andrew himself might be interested in. I have a brother-in-law who's up in Scotland who kind of thinks that the main slogan that we should be using is Tin Star. There is no such thing as rubbish, Tin Star, and that it would be really great if there were ways in which we could actually encourage people to take over each other's rubbish and reuse it. But I'll let Andrew comment on the suggestion about Free Cycle, etc.
Yeah, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot to add to that other than to say, yeah, it's a great idea. Obviously, we will do whatever we can to recycle. As Councillor Lynn said, we're urging Suez to fill a post that's been vacant since the start of the pandemic, actually, which is a recycling officer. It's in Suez's favour for things to be recycled, because recyclates have a value a lot of the time. So, you know, we're both pushing in the same direction on this sort of thing. We do a lot of positive campaigning work with schools, all that sort of thing. And the other thing as well is there's a lot of stuff on I'm not the world's greatest advocate of social media, but one thing social media is good at is allowing people to join up those people who have got something that they no longer want with those people who maybe would be quite happy to take that off their hands. So, you know, we'd also encourage people to use those more informal community-based recycling mechanisms as well. So we'll certainly take that on board, Councillor Smith. It's it's something we want to encourage as much as possible.
Fantastic, thank you. And over to Councillor Bellinger.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate that. Basically, I think Councillor Lynn may have actually answered my question, and that was, we've been having a look through the budget, and some of the figures have disappeared, and those figures were relating to the 3-week collection and the 4 before collections as well from rural areas. And what we were unsure of was whether those figures had actually been sort of like put into the future council delivery plan instead in there somewhere and not able for us to identify them. So I'm pleased that you've actually taken this on board. I'm fully supportive of the recycling centres on a closure for 2 days. I think that's the sensible idea. At least that then helps everybody throughout Calderdale. But I'm pleased to see that you've taken those others out. And as you've probably seen from my campaign, it hit about 19,000 views and over 3,000 signatures. So it was really a hot topic, was the taking off the 4 before recycling. So appreciate that, Councillor Lynn, that you've made that decision. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, on that bombshell, I think it's been a good discussion. So thank you very much. Very fruitful, and yeah, thank you. So on to the next item, I believe, which is the capital programme. Now, cabinet members, officers, you know, you're more than welcome to leave if you wish, or you can remain if you wish. It's totally up to you at your discretion. But we've got Rob here. Rob, are you there?
I am indeed, Chair. Yes.
Right, welcome, Rob. Well, I'm very excited for your report here. I think it's quite a good one. We've had discussions on the phone as well. So mainly over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Chair. And obviously thank you to the committee services staff who calmed the gods of video conferencing and allowed me to get on as well. Much appreciated. I'm going to try and share my screen. I'm not sure if that's tempting fate given the the trouble I've had getting onto the the call, but I will try my best. I think I just need to be given access to share my screen to show you the slides.
You should be there now, Robert.
Thanks, Kirsty. Right, so can everybody see a slide that says Calderdale's regeneration programme?
No.
No. Oh dear, I'll try again.
Oh, wait. Yeah, there we go.
That's great. That's great. Wonderful. Okay. So, well, I shall begin then. Thanks very much for inviting me. Much appreciated. I'm Robert Summerfield. I'm the corporate lead for major projects here at Calderdale. I've got two colleagues with me today, with two of my programme managers. That's Janet Whitlow, who's responsible for the Halifax Town Centre Delivery Plan, and Richard Binks, who's responsible for the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund A629 Corridor Programme and the new railway station in Halifax. So they're going to be presenting their slides on their programme, but I'll take the lion's share of the presentation. Thanks again, Chair, for assisting in putting the presentation together and setting the content. I hope this is useful for you. The presentation is really intended to give members of Scrutiny a general overview of the Council's regeneration activities. It doesn't focus in detail on a particular project, but covers the general themes and programmes. I'm hoping that it will spark some questions. We'll do our best to answer them, but given the scale of the portfolio, and obviously it's quite technically complex as well, if members require us to come back to scrutinise a specific issue, project or programme, more than happy to come back as many times as is needed. I'm conscious of the time as well, so I'll push through as quickly as I can. I think it might be easier just to take questions at the end, Chair, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I'll push through and I'll hand over to my colleagues when we get to their point in the presentation. So you should see a diagram now in front of you that says investment programmes. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So first of all, obviously to highlight that Calderdale's got really massive ambition in terms of regeneration. Given the size of the borough, its population and so on, we're pretty much cracking on with a really exciting portfolio and a very large portfolio actually for Calderdale of capital projects that will provide benefits for really much years to come and hopefully provide a sustainable future for the borough. There's approximately 200 capital projects in operation across the council at any one point in time. At present, the projects are valued really around £500 million, actually. There's a lot of money being spent in capital projects right across Calderdale, some very exciting projects as well. And that's over the next 5 years. The projects are arranged into programmes of activity, and they're either thematically or geographically grouped. And we've got a mixture of vision-led projects and emergent activities, you can see on the diagram here. The council's developed a regeneration brand, which is Calderdale Next Chapter. I'm sure many of you have seen that before. This has been used by major projects for some time on the projects that we administer, but other schemes are currently being moved under this banner now so that we can really give really communicate a coherent regeneration story for the whole borough. And I'll cover this in a little bit more detail in later slides. The programmes in red on this diagram are the ones that are administered by major projects. They represent about £355 million in capital value, and that's about 65% of the total activity in terms of capital projects that we have going in the council over the next 5 years. Major projects also support the team delivering the Future High Street Fund and town initiatives, and those are shown in green on this diagram. Those programmes are actually led through the Business Economy and Investment Service. The other programmes are led through housing and strategic infrastructure services, although as you'll see that there's some overlap between these initiatives which are managed holistically really by the Regeneration and Strategy Directorate. So the overlaps, the interfaces between them are all put together really by the management team of the Regeneration and Strategy Directorate. The TCF programme, which is Transforming Cities Fund programme, is a good example of this, where major projects are working with strategic infrastructure, each leading individual elements of that programme in line with the wider regeneration requirements. And the focus of that programme covers many geographical areas right across the borough. In terms of funding, the money that we spend on our capital schemes is predominantly from external sources, and most of that money is generally coordinated or allocated by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. For other sources, we either apply directly or have allocated funds from specific government departments. Our West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, I'm sure many of you have heard of it before, is the biggest single source of funding at about £200 million. This funding is allocated again by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority by central government. So the money comes from central government, it's administered by the Combined Authority. And that money came originally from the City Deal initiative. And we acquired that funding through a competitive bidding process, which we did through the Combined Authority. And I'll give you a little bit more information on that on the next slide. Calderdale's done really well in recent years in putting forward really comprehensive and well thought out bids. And we've received over 15% of this fund actually for only 8% of the population of West Yorkshire. So we've done extremely well out of that fund. Other funding on the list comes from other government departments. So you'll see funding on there from the Department for Transport, Department for Education, and obviously Housing, Community and Local Government as well. Projects that are funded internally by the council, either through capital that we have, Section 106 money, or from prudential borrowing, are actually the smallest element of our capital programme at this stage as well. So, how do we get our external funding? So there's numerous mechanisms that we use to apply for external funding. The majority of those mechanisms are based on the government's Green Book for project appraisal. The best example I can give you really is from the Combined Authority, and that's the one we use mostly. So the West Yorkshire Combined Authority's project assurance framework shown at the top of this slide, those little arrows here, and the 8 activities, that's actually the Combined Authority's project assurance framework that we follow. And it's used for assessing bids for external funding for all initiatives that the Combined Authority administer. So the insurance process itself consists of 8 activities, and these are based loosely on the project development and implementation process, which was developed by the Royal Institute of British Architects, or RIBA. You'll probably hear us talking about RIBA stages quite a lot in the construction industry, and most of the project development and implementation processes that we have are based on those, or based loosely on those stages. The assurance framework itself contains specific gateways, and again, government gateways, I'm sure you'll have come across many times before. They require the delivery authority, in this case Calderdale, to continually demonstrate that we've got a solid business case based on the Treasury's 5-case model. And that's shown on the slide here, covering strategy, economics, commercial case, financial case and management case. That we basically have to demonstrate that we are providing quality outputs and administering the project correctly and providing value for money. So the appraisal itself also considers the sort of wider strategic alignment as well, specifically with the Combined Authorities regional strategic economic plan, or the SEP. So within that SEP as well, certain areas of Calderdale have been assigned what's called strategic priority area status. And as such, they tend to attract more investment because they're seen as priorities within the strategic economic plan. So as it stands, Halifax and South East Calderdale have been allocated as spatial priority areas. So Halifax as a town centre and South East Calderdale centred around the Clifton Enterprise Zone. The trick in terms of acquiring capital really is to ensure that we develop projects which are a very good fit with the regional national priorities, on the basis that we are competing with other authorities for that limited funding, but are also reflective and supportive of local priorities. And you'll see those listed on the slide. And obviously I heard elected members discussing those priorities earlier on in the meeting. So those being the reducing inequalities, our prosperous towns, and responding to the climate emergency. So that's one of the things that we have to ensure that we do is that we provide a project really that's attractive in terms of the regional agenda, but also fits really well with our local agenda. And we do that alongside our lead elected members, and they obviously exert some really strong leadership in that regard. Funding's allocated in stages, and you'll see that on the slide there in those gateway stages as the project's developed. And the construction funding tends to get released at activity 5, which we call full business case plus costs. So the production of the business case itself, very highly technical, and the council often uses specialist consultants to assist in that, but officers do the mainstay of the work. The application for funding, as I say, is very competitive. And we shouldn't underestimate the massive effort that our politicians play in the various committees where decisions are made. It's very much a team effort between officers and members in terms of acquiring that fund. Demonstrating a strong ability to deliver the projects effectively against tough timescales is also really, really important as well, because that gives the combined authority confidence to allocate further funding in the future, because they'll know we'll spend the money and deliver those outputs. So the chair asked me if I'd summarise the various governance forums that we use in order to control the project, and that's what's shown on this slide. So these are the various project programme governance arrangements for the whole portfolio, really. As you can see, it's quite a complicated diagram. It's probably one that we could analyse in a scrutiny session on its own, really. But I hope it illustrates to you how we provide scrutiny and project assurance throughout both the project programme and portfolio stages. The Directorate's currently working with our senior officers and members to streamline this process even further, and that's just to improve the efficiency with which we make the projects happen, and how quickly and how effectively we make decisions and provide scrutiny over what we do. In terms of how we engage on the regeneration programme with the public, this diagram gives you a bit of a high-level summary of the sort of mechanisms that we use to engage with the public on our projects. Some elements of consultation are statutory requirements for the council, things like the planning process, for example, or council administrative procedures, things like this session, for example, the scrutiny session, ward forums, and so on. Others are not. Others are bespoke to individual projects. So we use a variety of means really to get the message out, including social media, press releases, member briefings, individual stakeholder consultations. As the projects move through decision, as the projects move through design and construction, we also engage quite heavily face-to-face with residents or businesses who may be affected by the works. The Calderdale Next Chapter website, many of you guys will have seen that website, is very much the hub for communicating what's happening. And we've also got a regular e-newsletter as well that can be subscribed via the website. I think it's safe to say consultation's been really difficult, I think, over the pandemic period for obvious reasons, and we've been constrained somewhat in our engagement activities. Many of these activities now have been switched to an online forum, and a good example really is the public consultation for the new Halifax rail station started this week, and we're doing that consultation via an online website. There's also a telephone number that the public and stakeholders can call to express their views, and they can also contact us by post as well. So we're trying everything that we can to continue the sort of high quality and high tempo of engagement that we've got with the public, but obviously respecting the restrictions that we've got under the pandemic too. In terms of the challenges we face in delivering the programme, well, there's quite a few. I've listed the main issues that we have to grapple with really as we deliver this programme. The scale of delivery really reflects the council's scale of ambition, really. We've really got the bit between our teeth. The main challenge really is coordinating construction projects. For example, from this year in Halifax, we'll be replacing all 13 major junctions in Halifax town centre as part of the Transport Fund, replacing the main gateway junction into Halifax town centre at Calder and Hevel, We're developing 2 large public squares. From 2022, we'll be delivering the new rail station. We're also overseeing WICA's, the Combined Authorities delivery of the new bus station in Halifax, and all that's happening against the backdrop of really positive investment from City Fibre and BT Openreach, who were bringing gigabit broadband into the town as well. So we're working very, very closely with a number of different stakeholders to ensure that we do the works as effectively as we can, and that we don't end up digging up what we've done to put cables in and so on. We're also making sure that we do the works and phase the works in a way that is the least disruptive we can possibly make to the town, obviously at this sensitive period. So yeah, we work very closely with a number of stakeholders to make that work, and that's really focused on just making sure that we don't disrupt the economy, but also that we can maximise the social value that we get from the significant spend that we'll be putting into Calderdale over the next few years. The work's massive in scale too. That's one of the big issues is coordinating these big projects. So that the picture you can see on this slide actually is a good example. This is the Salterhebble scheme, which many of you will have driven past as it was completed. So in widening the road, we actually removed over 5,000 tonnes, would you believe, of rock and soil from that hillside, and we actually stabilised the hillside with so many soil nails that if you put them end to end, they'd actually stretch 2 kilometres. So this is big stuff really that we're talking about here. Second challenge that we have to deal with really is around resources. So all local authorities struggle to recruit qualified and experienced project managers and technical staff, and that's mainly just due to general skill shortages right across the UK. There's a lot of projects happening, and there's very little in terms of skills, in terms of construction, regeneration, development management, and so on. So we've recently invested in a project management traineeship scheme called Grow Our Own. That trained 6 internal staff in project management, and they were mentored by myself and my senior team, 2 of which are here today. You'll see a picture of our trainees in the corner of this slide, resplendent in all their high vis. All but one of those trainees has actually now secured permanent work in a project management or assistant project management role within major projects. The one who didn't actually was poached by the Combined Authority for a role there, and that happens quite a lot. So obviously there's quite a lot of pressure from other public authorities who themselves, just like Calderdale, are resourcing to do projects. They often try and poach our staff, and we have to make sure we keep hold of them. So again, that Grow Our Own scheme was a really, really great success. It was great to be able to retrain staff internally to work on our high-profile schemes and focus on, values that we really see as important in terms of public service. The other positive element of this is that we were able to recruit a significant proportion of female staff. And obviously within construction, as many members will be aware, that women are underrepresented in the construction industry. And it's great to see that trend being booked here. As I discussed previously, I think in some of the other slides, most of the capital funding is now external that the council uses for its projects, so the bidding process can be very competitive. So there's a constant need for us to switch between delivering projects and bidding for funds, and that can cause a bit of a problem really in terms of delivering the schemes. So the more resources we focus on delivery, the less we focus on bidding. So funding often comes out of government as well at short notice. So a good example being the Getting Building Fund that many members will have heard of. We're only actually allowed 3 days to put our initial bids in for that scheme. So that gave us a rather unpleasant weekend, I must say. And it does tend to come out of government very, very quickly, and the council has to react very fast to acquire the cash. We got several million pounds actually out of that scheme, so we're pretty good at it. But it's a balancing act really. So at present we're working on developing a bit of a pipeline of shovel-ready projects, just ready to go. Should further funding come out of government. So we're working very closely with the Combined Authority to allow us to do that, to make sure that we've got projects that fit well with their agenda and obviously our own agenda too. The next 2 challenges really relate to construction industry itself. To be honest, it's not in a good shape. I've referenced some of the important industry reports on this slide, and you'll see them at the bottom here. that they explain this really well in terms of the problems being experienced within the construction industry. The main issues really are a lack of investment from the industry itself, either in skills or technology. There's also a rapidly aging workforce, so succession planning hasn't really been done very well. And again, that's contributing to the skill shortage that I mentioned previously. There's also quite a fragmented supply chain across the whole construction industry, which makes coordination of work particularly tricky. And obviously realising benefits such as social value as well can be quite tough too. I suppose the one that most members will be aware of is that there's a particularly predatory and litigious culture in construction, which we manage on a daily basis, and that's very difficult and can often lead to poor outcomes in construction. So the most recent report is the Farmer report. I think that one illustrates it best because the title of it is Modernise or Die. So, and again, it really explains some of the issues that both public and private sector clients have to deal with, and sadly the poor outcomes that we often receive as well from the industry in both sectors, going way back to before the 60s. So finally, the main challenge I think we have to overcome really as a borough is particularly in regeneration terms, is around development viability. So small and northern towns like ours are simply not as attractive to private sector investment as big cities like Manchester and Leeds, and it is often difficult to get private sector investment to come and sit alongside what we're doing in terms of regeneration. So there's a lot of reasons for that around land values and infrastructure and so on. But I think our huge efforts in terms of the regeneration programme that we've got are really aimed at overcoming these impediments to private sector investment, and that's very much what we've got in the front of our mind when we are designing or thinking about any project or programme. It's just how can we make sure that this really opens up Calderdale as an attractive place to come and invest money. And in recent months, actually, the word seems to have got out. I don't ever remember a period, certainly in my tenure here at Calderdale, where we've received quite so many inquiries from developers. So it does seem that investing in this programme is certainly bearing fruit, and hopefully will continue to do so. In terms of our regeneration programme, last few slides here summarise some of the large regeneration programmes we've got going on at the moment. And they're here just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we're currently doing, and the aims of those programmes are actually listed on this slide. I'll hand over now to Janet Whitlow, who'll talk us through briefly the Halifax Town Centre Delivery Plan programme.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Janet Whitlow. I'm the Programme Manager for Halifax Town Centre Delivery Plan. And my team deliver and I oversee all the capital projects and programmes that fall generally within Halifax Town Centre boundary. There's a few little differences, but the majority are in Halifax Town Centre. The slide Rob's put up sort of highlights how time flies. And in 2014, that was when we actually did the Halifax Town Centre Delivery Plan, which brought focus and prioritisation to all the different feasibility studies and ideas about regeneration, whether it was spatial or economic, within Halifax Town Centre itself. That's 2014, which is now 6 years ago, which is pretty unbelievable when we think about it. But then the flip side of that is what's so positive when you can see what's actually been achieved from that delivery plan that had within there the Peace Hall, the new central library, the town centre office strategy for the council itself, all those changes, asset renewals, taking us down, moving the offices around so that we'd left less staff around in different areas. All that work's happened over the last 6 years. At the moment, what's live for us and working, I'm really proud of the team over the last 12 months. Everybody's had difficulties throughout the pandemic and the problems we've had there, but over that time, we have actually delivered the sixth form college successfully. So we handed that over to Trinity Multi Academy in late June of 2020. And that's when we saw the students arrive in Halifax. If any of you, at that time, I think we were still allowed to come into Halifax town centre. 500 pupils now attending the sixth form college there. So that's a really big success in quite difficult circumstances. Live for us as well, continuing on the Northgate site at the moment, is the commercial side and development there. So we've secured Rawson Alliance as the tenant there. They're taking all 4 floors of the commercial and office building, which is 47,000 square foot just over, that they're taking there, which will bring into the town centre over 700 staff there as well. Works continue on there. I was on site this week, and it's really nice to see now that the work's starting inside, the plasterboard's starting to go up, and the fire stopping and all those side of things. So people on site working, and you can see the movement there. That's due to be completed and handed over in July of this year. Again, what's live for us at the moment as well is the Halifax Leisure Centre, which we're continuing with the design there. Slightly slowed down over the last 6 months while we focused on delivering the Northgate House project. So we're back up and running there with the Halifax Leisure Centre now. Designs will continue development, and this piece of work there, which will take us through to a full technical design, business case, income generation, funding, how that will be brought to cabinet members in autumn of this year there. And what we also do on the team is that there's other areas that we're looking at working on the Mixenden Hub as well. And we're also assisting in the development of the Future High Street Fund, the one for here in Halifax at the town centre as well. We're working on that. So lots of work, lots of exciting things, lots of opportunities, which are even, you've been talking this evening about, even more pertinent as we're looking to regeneration. But not only that, it's the COVID recovery. It's getting that footfall back into the town centre. And this, all the work we're doing here links to that. We were already on the road. COVID has thrown its things in for us, but the things that we're developing here will help with recovery as well of the town centre. Back over to Rob, I think.
Okay, thanks very much, Janet. So on to the South East Calderdale programme. So this programme is one that is managed by Richard Spensley. Many of you have come across Richard Spensley as one of the programme managers in my team. Certainly, if you've been to the local plan hearings, you'll have heard a lot from Richard. This programme is obviously one of the programmes that we've got, which is emergent and is geographically focused on a specific area, that being South East Calderdale. The idea really around this programme is the provision of infrastructure to support development in this area of Calderdale. And again, there's some significant aims of this programme around sort of improving quantum of houses, employment floor space, and safeguarding and creating new jobs. There is some significant and really quite some significant travel infrastructure going in there, which focuses not just on vehicular traffic, but it's multimodal as well. So that's focusing on active travel modes too, walking, cycling, etc. There's also work in there that will hopefully help to address the climate emergency at the moment and improve health and well-being for local people. In terms of key projects in this programme, I think most members will be well aware of the Clifton Enterprise Zone, which is proposed for this area as well. The A641 is a significant West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund scheme as well, where we've got nearly £80 million actually to deliver infrastructure in that area. And clearly the council's working closely with private landowners in that area to bring forward development as well. Right, I shall hand over to Richard. Richard Binks, who's the programme manager for the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, just to talk through his programme.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Richard Binks. I'm the programme manager for the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund for Calderdale. So what you can see on this slide is some of the key outcomes that we're trying to achieve within the fund, and some of the key projects. There are, in fact, additional projects which haven't made the list. I think the world that we're living in terms of this huge injection of capital investment, when you're talking about a £5 million scheme, it doesn't even make a list, which is what our position to be in there. So we've made some fantastic progress in the last 10 months in lockdown. We've actually achieved via the WICA assurance process, one case paper, that's on the A641, so we've got off the ground with that one. We've got one outline business case approved, which was the Halifax Station Gateway scheme in the railway station. We've got 2 full business case schemes approved, which are the Ellenwood Bottom Phase 1B project and Halifax Town Centre Phase 2. And we've also got one at the DP5 point, which is called the FBC Plus, which essentially approves the construction tenders on the Ellenwood Bottom as well. So we've made some significant progress. These are big milestones which we've been working towards for the last at least 4 years. And I think the programme now is in a position where we're reaching a position where all that hard work in the back room with a fantastic team that we have back in major projects is reaching fruition now. It's drawn down the relevant approvals from the grant funding body, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, who give us fantastic support, to a position now where we're actually appointing contractors, and we're going to be, during 2021, rolling out this work out in the public realm on the highway and within our town centre environments. I think as an understanding point, it's that we can see some more transparent activity coming forward into the public arena. You know, it's a line in the sand for the team in the sense that we're now going to have to adapt to a more commercial environment and a more, you know, sensitive in terms of travel opportunity, congestion, etc. during the course of the works. So we're certainly geared up for that. We've resourced very well. We've got the consultant support. We've built up a terrific expertise ourselves, you know, during this journey we've been on thus far. So just to give you a rundown on really where we are on the key projects. So Phase 1A is the scheme I guess you're all familiar with on Salthaber Hill and now the Drycliff Lane, the hospital. That was the first project actually delivered within the Transport Funds portfolio at West Yorkshire level, which is a huge amount of kudos for Calderdale and set us up on this you know, excellent reputation that we've gained thus far. That project, I think Rob's outlined the engineering challenge that was overcome there, and some of the stats that came out of that. But we indeed delivered it on time and under budget, which was further credit to the team. And I think that's the momentum that we want to carry forward on this. So the next one we're carrying on is A629 Phase 1B, which focuses upon Ellenwood Bottom. And it's the dual carriageway coming in from the 62 into the bottleneck, one of the notorious pinch points in the network called the Hebble Junction. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And it does connect into the Phase 1A works, you know, via Jubilee Road and past the filter beds there. So it introduces, you know, a huge amount of network efficiency. The intention is to reduce journey times, reliability, increase modal choice. There's a very strong focus upon public transport, cycling and walking. We're absolutely, you know, determined to future-proof that and provide that amenity which doesn't exist at the moment. You know, we're very keen on that indeed. So that work has been awarded as a construction tender, and in February, only a month's time, we'll be doing some of the site clearance. Unfortunately, we have to remove some trees. We are creating a new bridge over the canal as an alternative route in, you know, to the Upper Valley, down to Stainland Road. So that work will be starting then, with the main construction start in May. It's going to take a good 18 months, 20 months to actually build this. It's a significant engineering scheme. It's the biggest engineering scheme Calderdale's conducted since the 1960s. So I think, again, it's a milestone achievement. So we've appointed the site supervision team. We're all geared up to, you know, to make this substantive start. In parallel with that, 629 Phase 2, which is Halifax Town Centre. Now, this is the benchmark scheme in terms of the redevelopment of the public realm in Halifax. Upwards of £50 million investment. It's absolutely huge. There's not a street or pavement that we're not going to touch in the town centre. Rob's already mentioned the peripheral works, which was more traditional civil engineering on the junction, efficiencies on each respective junction and on the east and west of the town. That goes hand in hand with the work on the new bus station. It's a new bus routing network. an anti-clockwise route around town. I think Halifax has got a huge amount of key dependencies in terms of the new railway station, the future High Street Fund monies, the work that Janet's doing on some of the key buildings. And the third aspect is a high quality masonry aspect to the infrastructure in terms of town squares and that aesthetic quality that we're going to introduce, which, Market Street is going to be paved in a similar vein that Southgate is. There's plans to create gateway points towards End, down by the railway station and Northgate. It really is, the street's going to be paved with stone. It's going to be quite a beautiful vision to think about, and I can't wait to see it built. There's going to be tree-lined boulevards, etc., connecting through to Dean Clough, for instance. Really strong cycle connectivity. There's a new cycling standard called LTN 120 from the DFT. Again, you may have heard of that in the news. It really does future-proof that cycle optioneering and that safety and that directness, and a huge amount of focus is being put on the respective junctions and the core routes through town and onward connectivity to that. So again, as I mentioned, with FBC, we are now in the position of preparing the construction tender. We've been working with the marketplace to drum up support and interest in that. We're getting a lot of good feedback from the tier 1 contractors in the UK. That tender is going to go out towards the end of April with a view to making the construction start in late summer. We don't have the programme yet, but we've certainly got an ambition to start during the summer period. So just quickly moving on then, phase 4 is the active travel strategy between Halifax and Huddersfield. It's focused very much upon bus intervention, a linear cycle route connecting the two towns together, a lot of walking intervention in there as well. That's appointed at an OBC level. We have a consultant working on that now proactively towards an FBC coming forward. The other scheme that you see on there is the new railway station. You're probably aware at the moment that a fantastic video that Councillor Scullion's put out trying to publicise the survey that we've put out on consultation. The last time I looked on Facebook on that one, it had well over 10,000 views. I think that's been a huge success. It's only been live for a few days. So strong interest in what we're doing. It looks really, really great. And I think that scheme, if you look at the images, it's going to be a real placemaking as well as pragmatic opportunity to facelift that side of town. Terrific scheme. I mentioned the bus station because it is a partner scheme. It is part of what we're doing. It's a new bus station for Halifax. The other ones that don't make the list there, the smaller ones, the A58, the A646, Newport Valley and going to Ripponden, and of course Ellen Railway Station. So yeah, in a nutshell, we're making huge progress and we can look forward to works being executed on the ground during the course of the year.
Thanks very much, Richard. That's really good. And obviously, Richard's been with us for a long time. I think there's probably no junction or area of Calderdale that Richard hasn't had something to do with the design for. Indeed, Richard was responsible for the Hebden Bridge scheme as well, which we all love. So I think we're in safe hands design-wise, and I think you can probably see just how enthusiastic we are about cracking on with this really exciting programme. So the next slide really is just one for me to just rush through. This is the Future High Street Fund that you'll all be aware of. This programme is administered not by major projects but by business innovation and skills within the council under Karen Horton, who's the programme manager, although obviously there is some overlap between our work for obvious reasons. This slide focuses on Halifax, but obviously be aware that this programme also covers other Future High Street Fund investment in Elland and obviously the Town Deal investment in Brickhouse and Todmorden, not to mention the Sorby Bridge Heritage Action Zone monies as well. The outcomes we're looking for in terms of this programme is a focus on increasing jobs in the town, improving tourism and particularly dwell time within the town centre itself to support local businesses. The programme will invest in connectivity, public realm, it will support local businesses as well, directly and indirectly. It will invest in our heritage buildings and improve opportunities for housing provision within the town centre as well. Key projects in Halifax really being improvements to our rather awesome borough market, introduction of new areas of public realm, some of which sort of merge into the Transport Fund programme that Richard just discussed, particularly their areas around George's Square. Obviously supporting local development at Westgate as well, and various connectivity and cultural improvements are proposed as part of this programme too. Final slide here from me is one that just considers future external funding that we may well acquire over the future years. It's purposefully vague, and that's mainly because we're still awaiting detail on much of the funding streams which will come from government in the next few years. It looks likely that government will replace the growth deal with a fund called the Shared Prosperity Fund in the near future. We also expect to benefit from the recent devolution process and the proposed infrastructure bank. Finally, I think it looks certain that additional funds will flow from government. So what we've got at the moment is very much just the start, particularly as we start to recover from COVID-19. We do expect more money to come out to support the local economy through regeneration schemes. Council will, of course, endeavour to secure a fair amount for Calderdale, and we hope that in the future we can just carry on this exciting and really quite revolutionary programme that we're implementing over the next few years. Very much at a point now where, we've been dreaming about these schemes for a while, designing them, bidding for the funding, and from 2021 onwards, just when we need them, actually, as the borough recovers from the pandemic, we can start constructing some really exciting and revolutionary infrastructure and construction projects, public realm, and so on for Calderdale. So really excited to talk to you about this. Really interested to hear your views. Obviously, some of these are incredibly technical and detailed programs. So if there is something that's really detailed, more than happy to come back as many times as you need for us to go through this with you. Thanks very much for listening. Obviously, happy to take questions at your discretion, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's clear that there's a lot going on, put simply. I think it's exciting because, especially as a scrutiny board as well, this provides a great overview, a great platform in some ways to maybe go and look in depth at a few projects. And it's just a bit of a shame, really, that we're in this COVID climate, because it would actually be nice to hop in a minibus in some ways and look at these projects which are under construction. So I somewhat envy Janet in that respect. Can I pass on to Councillor Fenton Glynn?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we're in a minibus, I'm not sure who the naughty kids at the back would be.
Definitely Councillor Scullion.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that was really useful. And I think I'd probably we could spotlight on any one of the projects, and I'm going to resist the temptation to do so. I think one thing that I'm interested in terms of moving forward and kind of with a large number of capital projects, is what are we doing to make sure? You said about the problem with the building industry. I spoke to an architect friend of mine recently, and he said the thing about public sector contracts is you basically sort out a contract, bid low, and then sue later. We've managed some brilliant projects, but there have been those moments at the end of the projects where it's gone into that realm, it's gone into the various bridge funding, and it's totally understandable, particularly when there's a global pandemic on that some of that's happened. But what can we do to really A, make sure that the bids are realistic and that they're not going to come out with this, and B, make sure that we're managing that. And that's not in any means of a criticism, because I actually think we do it as well as any large commissioning body does it. I just think that it's a fundamental problem with the market. I'd just be really interested in what we're doing and how we're learning from one project to the next to make sure that we're learning to solve those problems.
Thanks, Councillor. If I may, Chair. So, good question, Councillor. Absolutely good question. and the way you characterise the construction industry there is quite illustrative, really, of what we're up against. I wouldn't say it's just public sector contracts either. I think one of the things that certainly in the world that we occupy, we have a lot of contact with the private sector as well. They suffer from this just as much as we do. You just don't find out about it. And it's an uphill struggle. It really is, to deal with some of the practices which we do experience within the construction industry. Some good practice, and you'll see in some of the reports actually that were referred to in the presentation, use of the NEC contract is one of the main things that is really quite important, and the council have been gradually moving where appropriate to use of NEC contracts. Now, the NEC contract was developed after the Latham and Egan reviews into construction, and it really much focuses more on collaboration. And it's written.
I'm sorry, I'm a lay person, so you are going to have to just quickly explain NEC contract.
Sorry, of course, yeah. So NEC stands for New Engineering Contract, and that contract is a bespoke type of contract that's written for construction projects. There's various different forms of it, and there's lots of different versions of that contract which are specific for individual types of projects and individual types of construction procurement that are used. And that contract's actually set up really in plain English, so it's a lot easier to manage. But the idea of that contract is to get to a point where potential disputes are resolved there and then, rather than at the end of a scheme. Now, older forms of construction contracts, and some of those are quite appropriate to use on certain projects and certain circumstances, but the older forms of contract tend to focus on getting the project delivered and then agreeing a final account right at the end. So that's obviously a recipe for litigation, really, and it's something that we tend to try and avoid as best we can. So all the large schemes now that are coming forward, particularly infrastructure schemes, where the money is significant and the complexity is there as well, will be managed under that NEC contract, and that's very important for the council to keep track of this. It's not a panacea, so there still is some problems in terms of, as you mentioned, what we would call suicide bidding, where we bid low. We see a contractor bidding low artificially to try and instigate a litigious challenge later on. Clearly, we work with some really good consultants, and getting the budget right is an art form in itself. In construction, because it is so complicated and so affected by the external environment, the weather. One of the interestingly, the phase 1A scheme that we just discussed there at Salter Hebble was actually delayed due to a general election that stopped us releasing the funding, and that resulted in a claim that came through. So we are managing a project environment, but that is affected by that external environment. We do our best to foresee all those risks, and the risk analysis and risk mitigation process is one which is at the front of our mind whenever we're delivering those schemes. But really, we try and work with consultants who, one, set realistic budgets so that we know when we get tenders in, they're not unrealistic tenders or not predatory tenders, and two, we try and foresee as many risks as we possibly can. But as you can imagine, things like the pandemic, the beast from the east, these things are I suppose not reasonably foreseeable in any great sense, and we do our best to manage around that, but sometimes that can cause us some significant problems as well. So those are the sorts of mechanisms we do, and clearly recruiting experienced staff to oversee the schemes as well, it makes it extremely important that we have really experienced staff on the council side to make sure that we're adequately protected as well.
Can I ask a quick follow-up with your indulgence, Chair? Just how much latitude do you have then to essentially say no to a cheaper contract because you believe that they've not taken into account all of the things that need to be taken into account? Because I understand the importance of, getting these things as cheap as possible, but then, if you then get a cheap contract that you're slightly skeptical about, is how easy is it to say no?
So normally, councillor, we would when we go out to procure, the driving factor isn't always cost. We normally set a split between what we would call price and quality. So the trick really is in going out to tender is to focus on getting a very good level of quality. We also ask contractors specific questions about how they'll manage a scheme, and we get a double level of assurance really when we're going through transport fund assurance processes, because we're required to demonstrate our management case to the combined authority to get the funding. So when we go back, you'll have probably heard Richard mentioning our full business case plus gateway stage through the combined authorities assurance process. That's where we're required to demonstrate that we've both assembled the right land, and we show them our contracts that we've got and we've procured, and they'll give us a level of assurance on that as well. So yeah, we don't go for the lowest price tender anymore. That's sort of an old-fashioned way of procuring. That that caught out public authorities some time ago. But we focus on a correct split, I think, between quality and price to make sure we get the right tenders. We also do some really quite stringent checks with our audit colleagues on the level of money that contractors have. Are they a going concern? Are they secure in their trading? Because you can tell quite a lot from that, particularly for sort of more fly-by-night contractors who won't have a very good financial showing in terms of their records at Companies House, and we'll look into that as well. But it's yes, there's very much a fine art of choosing the right contractor for the right job, setting the right price quality mix to make this work. But it's a constant challenge, I would say.
Thank you. That's a good questions there, Josh. Can I ask Councillor Kavanagh to come in?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a few, so I'll try and be brief. Just to start off with, it's just so exciting. When I moved to Calderdale 8 years ago and I first went to Halifax, I'll be really honest, it just felt so run down. It felt like it was full of, pound shops and just not a lot going on. Whereas now you can really feel the change. I used to go to Manchester, whereas now I might choose to go to Halifax, and we can't underestimate how the feeling of a place makes you feel. Like, it makes you feel proud to live there. It makes you feel like you can access things. It massively changes the way you feel about where you live, even if you live, like I live in Todmorden, but you feel like you've got an amazing place to go to. So it's just really, really exciting, and I think will change how people feel about living in Calderdale, even if they already love it. But I've got some specific comments. So I did the consultation on the train station, which I have to say I absolutely loved. I particularly loved the fact that I could comment on the design of the footbridge. I thought that was an amazing touch. I just wanted to say I'm really hoping that the comments that people put in, how seriously they're going to be taken, because for me, I want the train station to really meet the needs of everyone. So often when we're not in COVID, part of my week I'm a freelancer, and I'll be working on the train, get off, then I run to a council meeting, then I'm at the Halifax train station. Currently now I can't do anything. There's no tables, there's no plugs, there's nothing for working people that need to be able to keep working. And so everyone's got loads of different needs, families, children. So it's just commenting on, will the small comments that have been put in around what people really need be taken seriously? And then I was really pleased to see that in the town centre there was one line around spaces for artists or for arts practice. Calderdale Cultural Practice Partnership, some of the artists and cultural practitioners in there have commented that they don't feel like there's enough spaces for them to actually work, and they're really looking for that. So I think that's a great thing, because they commented that mostly they go to Manchester, Bradford, Leeds, and they really want to kind of deliver arts work where they live. But connected to that, I wondered if we could have something in Halifax that links all the wards. One of the things we're always talking about is, we're all these disparate, geographically separated wards, but Halifax is kind of our capital. So it'd be amazing to have something in the centre of Halifax that celebrates all of the different wards, whether, and maybe that could link to an artist representation, but something where you get there and you see Myden Road, you see Todmorden, Brighouse, that you think, yeah, we're all part of this. And then this is just maybe a slightly negative comment, but Mixenden Hub, we really need to see the timescale for that, because lots of people are really unhappy and feel like that's been promised for a long time. So I think we really need to see a timescale for when that's going to be delivered. And then my final comment, I promise, Chair, is I'm just wondering if you've made contact with adult education, Calderdale Adult Education, but also other adult education organisations, because 50% of all apprenticeships have been cancelled during COVID. So young people have absolutely massively lost out. All of their placements have ended. And you talked about this construction work, and there are lots of construction apprenticeships or jobs that relate to apprenticeships, and young people are really suffering and don't have the placements now. So I know you're going to be working with external organisations, but this would be a great opportunity to link with some adult education and get some of our young people things to do during all of this period.
Thank you. I should probably note as well, if any member, we do have the work programme to discuss after this, but I completely appreciate if any member has to go, including cabinet members or something. I should also comment saying that, because I appreciate this is going on till quite a late time. But yes, can I pass on to Rob?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, there was a lot there, so I'll do my best to answer it all in turn. So, in terms of feedback, yes, all that granular feedback that we get is basically recorded and examined in immense detail in terms of the train station, and shared with elected members. And we do consider this, very, very carefully. The whole point of consultation is to get out there and get people's views and find out what people need. And I think it was put quite well in terms of the introduction to the consultation. I think for the train station, this is going to be a train station that works for everybody, and we'll be consulting extremely widely with various different groups. Great ideas, actually, in terms of artistic space and so on. Really keen to hear more about that and investigate how we might deal with that. Just to highlight as well, there is going to be space for artistic works and so on, actually, in the phase 2 scheme as well, in the public realm area. So the Eastern Gateway and the gardens around the sort of Hughes Corporation area will have space as well for putting on artistic and cultural works as well. So the ideas that you put forward, Council, around representing the other boroughs, Todd, Brighouse, and so on, perfect for that sort of area. Really keen to hear more about that and how we might work that. So yeah, absolutely, that feedback gets taken in real granular form. The idea really of the consultation on the station gateway is again, let's understand what people want in that area and get the comments on the design. One of the reasons we didn't comment on which option would you like in terms of the bridge, for example, is because we want to hear what people think of all those options, and we may well, merge them all together in some way or find a different way around that. We're at a very early stage of design. We want to make sure that we've got the opportunity for a very iconic structure there, haven't we, at the train station? And it's important that we get something that's representative of Halifax and Calderdale more widely, and is obviously acceptable for members of the public to walk across and look at for the next few decades, of course. So yeah, absolutely, that's the process. So we will. One of the benefits, I suppose, of having the feedback sessions online is that we get that level of granular feedback in written form that we can translate straight away. Sometimes when it's face to face, you can only catch little comments here and there, and it's difficult to get it all. But that's one of the benefits, I suppose, of the situation we find ourselves in. In terms of apprenticeships and learning, clearly, social value is at the heart of everything that we do in terms of procurement on our capital schemes. So I can assure you that that's very much at the forefront of our mind as we procure all our capital works. So we've done work already. The sixth form college is a great example where Janet's team put together a sort of have a go day for local young people who are interested in construction as a career, to go and have a look at some of the construction trades. They receive presentations from architects, surveyors, project managers, and so on, and hopefully inspire them into a construction career. We're also working quite closely with our Children and Young People's Directorate to see how we might integrate the looked after children and the corporate parenting aspects of the council's work into the capital schemes as well. That's something I'm really keen to do. I'm a former looked after child, so I'm really keen to make sure that that's that's put right at the front of what we do around social value. So again, it's possibly quite a long-winded thing to describe in terms of everything that we do, but happy to come back to you and on that specific issue if needed for scrutiny, because again, really keen to hear people's views about how we sort of maximise our social value in terms of using SME companies, local companies in the work that we do, but also ensuring that we provide skills and training as well. So yeah, it's really at the heart of what we do. Mixenden Hub, we expect to be on site in the next few months. Actually, there's a lot of work to do on that site, including sort of demolition and landscaping work. So we'll be starting that in the next few months. I'll hand over to Janet. It's one of Janet's projects, so she can talk you through the overall program in terms of the remaining design work and construction. But I would say you'll start to see work happening at Mixenden in the next few months as we'll start to move that exciting project forward. Janet?
Yes, I can give you a wee bit of an update on Mixenden. Professional team are regrouped and working. There's some design work to complete. But at the moment, the actual documentation is being put together to go out to tender, what we were talking about earlier on, for our construction contractor, which that will be done in the next 2 months. So we're starting to move on to site. We expect by April, as Rob's highlighted there is the demolition to do on the remaining small Mixenden Library, which was vandalised, wasn't it, recently? That's to come down. So you will start to see movement on there within the next 2 to 3 months. And also, as I say, tender packages going out for the construction company as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Robert, may I thank you for a great presentation, really ably supported by Janet and Richard. I think after months and months of COVID, it's been great to hear you speak about these ambitious plans. And of your presentations, I wrote on my notes here, palpable enthusiasm. And it's out loud and clear. You've clearly got a great team. And just coming back very briefly on the train station, I was involved in that years ago when we were first looking at that. And Councillor Kavanagh mentioned her first impressions when she first came to Calderdale. And it's absolutely true that for many people, the first time they see Halifax is when they get off a train. And that first impression, as happened with Councillor Kavanagh 8 years ago, is a very important first impression. So getting it right is fantastic. So I think all of us in different political configurations share the enthusiasm for this. It's absolutely fantastic. One of my concerns, and I'm not going to mention it now, I'll mention it in all the budget meetings that we politicians have got to have. We've got to find a way of making all of this affordable because it is very, very ambitious. Everybody knows that. So I think that Josh Fenton-Glynn asked most of the questions I was going to ask, but maybe I'll reinforce one of them by asking you, given all of this wonderful news, providing we can sort out the money, it's just going to be great. Given all these construction projects are happening simultaneously, and given all the problems you've mentioned, will we be able to realistically deliver all of these all-to-tight schedules in a difficult environment for the construction industry and project management? Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments from officers on that one?
I can certainly comment there. Can we deliver it? Well, absolutely we can. I think we've got a great team. And, you know, in terms of the core of officers who are responsible for these schemes, you met 2 of them today. I think the level of enthusiasm and level of experience we've got is extremely good. And, you know, I think we're in a very, very good place, possibly a better place than most other West Yorkshire authorities, if I may say so, in terms of one, the capital that we've acquired for this, mostly from external sources, and two, our ability to turn that capital from, you know, a business case on a bit of paper to an actual civil engineering or construction project. Yes, there's going to be challenges in terms of delivering this scale of regeneration at the same time, and mostly that, as I was alluding to in the presentation, is around just coordinating all these different work streams together and just ensuring that we deliver that regeneration in a sensitive way so that it doesn't disrupt the local economy and the facilities that people use in our towns. We've got a significant level of resource in terms of the officers at the moment, looking directly into how we sort of map where individual projects will happen and when. We focus significant detail on the level of risk that we're undertaking, and all the projects that we've got moving forward have a massive level of contingency in them. We build that in based on lessons that we've learned over recent capital schemes, just to make sure that we're not caught out by something from the external environment, or as we've seen through problems through the construction industry as well. So we're building those sort of realistic contingency levels. On the transport fund scheme, that you'll see that on some of the papers as what they call QRA, quantified risk analysis is what they refer to it there. But basically, it's contingency funding. So we've got some money put aside in case something happens that we're not expecting in that project, and there's some very healthy sums in there. So yes, we've got some challenges ahead. I wouldn't want to give you any impression other than it's a big thing we're undertaking here, but we're up for it. We've really got the bit between our teeth, and we've got some great people implementing these schemes. So yes, I think in answer to your question, Councillor, really good question. Yes, we can do it.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I know Councillor Scullion's point about the steel capped boots, so I note that. Councillor Dacre. Is it? I've noticed you've just put just one in the chat. Is that a question or?
No, it referred to the typo in the previous comment from Councillor Scullion.
Oh right, okay, just one. Fantastic. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, it does. It all sounds really exciting, and very, very pleased to hear about Mixenden. The question was for Richard about the new bus station and new train station. They're great infrastructure projects and they will look good, but they won't be very good if they haven't got a decent bus service, especially fitting in. Now, I know you talked a bit about the integrated bus service, but how can we sort of guarantee that? What guarantees are there that there will be buses to fill the bus station? And then the other question was about the impact of Brexit on supply, and I really appreciate that whole bit in there about the challenges, because I hadn't realised half of that, so it's been a real eye-opener and that's been really interesting. But I just wondered if Brexit's going to have any impact on supply. And the last point I wanted to ask about was, in the light of COVID, I think outdoor space is much more important, and I see the designs, they look fantastic. But I also think that we need a decent amount of covered space, because we have a lot of wet weather in this country, and I think people need outdoor covered space to when we're not in 2 meters apart, or maybe when we are. But I think we deserve to have spaces where we can meet outside and not be in the rain all the time.
Yeah, I can answer some of them questions, if not all. Certainly the bus services, clearly the schemes are interdependent. The new bus station is obviously a magnificent piece of infrastructure. However, it does need the patronage of the bus companies to use it, and we're fully aware of that. We do work very, very closely with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, who are the bus regulator. As far as we're aware, there's certainly no plans to start reducing bus services. I think, as we all know, they're probably at a subdued level at the moment, but the longer term forecast does predict that it will get back to how it was, and indeed increase. And indeed, that's, as a strategic outcome, what we're trying to do, increase patronage of the public transport network and reduce that dependency on the private vehicle. And the new bus station, the new curbside, anti-clockwise bus routing around the Halifax town centre is designed to capitalise on that. There's a huge amount of modal interchange, for instance, down at the railway station, which is not particularly well served by buses at the moment. Within the body of these schemes, there will be a sort of a micro interchange. There'll be 4 bus stops around the base of Horton Street and on Square Road around the New Eastern Gateway. And so absolutely there will be interconnectivity and the opportunity to move around town a lot freer. So that is absolutely key, and we're fully aware of that. In terms of Brexit, it's a very, very good point. The supply chain could potentially be disrupted, certainly if some of these materials, etc., come from Europe. Certainly some of the natural products, I'm thinking more about granite here, not stone, which is obviously Yorkshire. That is no doubt going to be sourced from Europe. At the moment, again, we're not being told by our certainly the contractors that have been appointed for the Phase 1B scheme, for instance, that's going to be a particular issue. They were more concerned about, in one respect, the effects of the pandemic, because apparently in Ireland the construction industry has been halted, and there was a slight concern the other day even that might emerge into the UK, but the UK government are not saying that at the moment. As I say, in terms of that pinning down of that contract, it's already been let. The prices have been submitted. There's an opportunity within that contract for the contractor to claim additional, increases, uplifts, etc., for particular items should they get into trouble. It's not something that's inbuilt in there. It's got to be a change of scope. It's got to be an issue that's happened on site. If there's an increase in cost there, to be legitimately allowable under the NEC contract that Rob's outlined. So again, as far as we're aware, we're future-proofing against that intervention. And the last one's covered space. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think, again, in terms of the works that we're doing in the public realm areas, in fairness, we're not looking at canopies. It's a good point that you make, though. I think if you can count trees as a particular canopy, arguably there's a degree of cover there. Depending upon the bridge option, for instance, in Station Gateway, there could be an elevated aspect to that. You could walk under, a design which had that roofing space to it. Again, let's see how the outcome of that comes. I think, we are working with the local developers. Certainly, we have the terrific, canopy space on Albion Street and around there, and the Borough Market, and I do believe there's private sector plans to potentially expand that around to what I call the Fish Market Street, to the side of the Borough Market. So I think, yeah, it's a good point. I don't think we can perhaps fully answer that one in terms of our own works, but there's certainly something in the ether with partners to the fore.
Thank you very much. I'll ask a quick question, then I'll bring in Councillor Holdsworth, and I think we're pretty much there. My question, I've got a few, but I'll keep it to one. First of all, thank you. It's been an absolute great discussion. The supply chain, it's fair to say, is under so much pressure from COVID. It's fairly unbelievable. I know the government have introduced temporary legislation, which is it's creating an environment where there's a lot of companies which are on the verge of insolvency, but they're nonetheless able to operate. For example, directors can take a moratorium to stop enforcement action from creditors. You've got provisions which allow or don't allow a supplier to terminate contracts if there's an insolvent company. It's quite unbelievable stuff. Just wondering, essentially, I suppose the council is a big project manager. We've got all of these projects. To what extent are these supply chain issues causing, I suppose, number one, time delays for our projects? What's the current status? Are we expecting time delays? Number two, risk. What's the risk implication for the council? And then number 3, is this risk in some ways mitigated by insurance? Now, I know the insurance element, that's dependent on our insurance contracts, and that's been going through the courts recently. But yeah, those are my questions: timescale, risk, and insurance. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Chair. So in terms of the programme that we've got going now, in terms of the impact that the supply chain problems that you've outlined would have on us, it would only affect us during construction phase. And as you're aware, that there's not a significant number of projects currently ongoing which are in that phase, although as we've just heard, we're likely to be moving from sort of middle of this year onwards into a significant stage of construction. Smaller suppliers are obviously more vulnerable than bigger main contractors. Most big main contractors have their own supply chain which they've assembled underneath them, and generally risk is sort of passed down all the way through. It doesn't go up, unfortunately. So, you know, even the bigger main contractors are basically just assemble that supply chain. That's what you get. You know, it goes as, you know, right down the tiers of different suppliers, from your main contractor, you know, your Bovis to the person in a van then that comes up and actually, you know, does the work. So it's a very challenging situation to manage, and we enter this sort of situation where it becomes a delicate balancing act. Now, if the council wants to safeguard itself as best it can in terms of risk, then it would be logical to use very large main contractors every time. But then we enter a situation where we don't get the level of choice that we need around the supply chain to ensure that we're actually maximising social value. So there's a sort of an inherent struggle there, really, between how we maximise spend in the local economy and how we minimise our risk. And there is the problem, really, when we go out to tender for different contractors as to how do we maximise local spend versus how do we minimise our risk. And that's the balancing act that when project managers put forward a procurement strategy and have that approved, we have to investigate every single time, really. And it's quite a challenge, I would say. It really is. So yeah, construction is all about risk, as you know. It's all about risk management and transferring risk where you need to, managing risk that you can't transfer, and so on. There's limits to what you can do with insurance, and we found that out on a variety of different projects where what we've had delivered from contractors might not necessarily be of the correct standard or so on. We safeguard ourselves with the contracts that we use, but clearly, you know, if we use a contractor that is not necessarily secure or goes bump, you know, your contract can only, you know, you can only get back from the company what you would get through administration. So it's a challenge, and you're right to highlight it. To get the work done, we need to use that really fragmented and difficult supply chain. Obviously, as I've mentioned previously, we do our due diligence as best we can on our capital schemes. We try wherever we can to use contractors. We've got a good track record, and wherever we can safely, we'll use smaller contractors as well to maximise social value. But inherent is in every construction decision that we make in terms of which contractors we use. We have to make that value judgment. Most of the time we get it right. As I say, there's about 200 projects going at any one point in time in the council. And most of them you probably never hear about. Where we do get it wrong sometimes, where we have problems, you will hear about it, and for good reason. But we do our best to mitigate that risk as best we can right the way through the whole value chain of a project. Normally it works quite well, but yeah, we're sometimes we have to deal with problems from the outside.
That's interesting. Yeah, thank you, Rob. Thank you for that. Can I bring in Councillor Scullion? Because I think you said you want a short word.
Yes, and thank you to the team. I feel humbled, really, and I feel privileged actually to work with them. I just wanted to pick up a point that Councillor Audrey Smith made about buses and trains and public transport. And I wondered, in terms of thinking about your forward plan, work plan, whether the recovery of the bus and the rail services in particular may well be something you would want to take a look at in due course.
Yeah, Alex, can we make a note of that, please? And we can bring it up in the work programme after this item.
Absolutely, Chair. And if I may as well, just perhaps remind members of the board about the review into rail services that unfortunately couldn't take place towards the beginning of last year due to COVID. But there are a number of aspects of that still in place and plans there that could perhaps be brought back up to speed and updated a bit and perhaps deployed into a new review should members wish to look into that.
Very good. Thank you very much, Councillor Scullion and Alex. Thank you. Final words to Councillor Holdsworth.
Thank you, Chair. It's a point I think that Councillor Scullion referred to slightly obliquely, and that's the buses and trains. The government has positively discouraged usage of public transport now for nearly a year. When we had the relaxation, I travelled into work in and out of Leeds, and the trains were empty. They are being subsidised to run. Stagecoach on the buses, First Group, they're losing millions. They are making no money at all from the fare box. And the likelihood is that once COVID is over, if we hope it ever gets over, there will be a reduction of services from rural to urban areas in particular, because the bus companies cannot afford to maintain the fleets they've got. The bus park at the moment of vehicles that are not in use is 93,000 across the country. And whether or not these buses are going to go back into service, however much we would all like them to be back in service, I think is very questionable. And it's just really to reinforce Councillor Scullion's point. Are these issues of changing people's behaviour, more people going to continue to work from home post-COVID, and the impact economically on public transport, have they been factored into the costs and the development of the new bus and train station? Thank you.
I could possibly answer that in part, if you do allow me to.
Yes.
In terms of the bus station, I understand from the business case that it is still viable, still a viable business case if passenger numbers drop to 60% of previous volumes. So it's such a strong benefit cost ratio on that particular project that even with a 40% reduction in passenger numbers, it's still a viable business case. So I think there's a strength there. I think we're in an awful position, let's face it. But I think, that the forecasting now has switched from that immediate gain to one experienced over the years to come. And I think that's the focus now, trying to capture what we had before and then improve on it. And that'll take a longer period to develop than an immediate realisation. And I think that's recognised at the funding bodies and at the Combined Authority as well. But there's absolutely a commitment to continue this good work that we're planning, that there's certainly no indication that they're pulling any of these schemes at all. They are happening, within a live situation of development and delivery, and that's continuing on. But as I say, the focus is switching now more to a medium and long-term outcome gain, if I could say.
Thank you, Mr. Binks. Thank you.
Right, very good. Well, on that bombshell, I'd like to make a proposal, especially considering it's this time. I think it's more than merited. I'd like to my proposal is to thank Rob, Janet and Richard specifically for your time. I'd like to note your enthusiasm for projects across Calderdale. I'd like to say we as a board endorse your ambitious and bold approach, and as a board we'd like to thank everyone across the projects team, because I know you've got major projects, but then you've also got other teams that feed in from major projects. So we'd like to express our thanks to everyone who's involved in creating this vision for Calderdale. So I'd like to make that proposal. Could I have a seconder, please? Yeah, take your pick, Kirsty. I'll let you choose. We'll go with Councillor Fenton Glyn. All those in favour?
It's the most controversial vote of the evening.
Good, and that's unanimous. So thank you so much for attending, and please pass our thanks on to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Richard.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Good. On to the next one. I'm sure there'll be elements that we can pick up in that one at a later stage. The work programme, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mike and I met with the Chair and Deputy earlier this week to look over the work programme, and there was just a couple of points that came out of that discussion that I wanted to raise with the board tonight. First off, you may have seen that the board currently has an item around COVID-19 recovery scheduled for the March meeting, which was planned to include a broad discussion regarding the progress around the Council's COVID-19 recovery plan. Officers have suggested, though, that it may be more timely to provide some key headlines on progress around the recovery plan during the February meeting instead. And perhaps link this into the board's discussion of the Economic Inequalities Detailed Review report, which will be presented to the board for discussion and agreement during that meeting, and will also, of course, be used to help inform the recovery plan itself moving forwards. So if members are in agreement, I'd like to suggest perhaps that the board adopts this item in the February meeting off the back of the Inequalities Detailed Review discussion, as opposed to its current placement at the moment during the March meeting. And also as well, I'd just like to bring up that the Chair and Deputy noted that the work programme is looking relatively packed for both the February and March meeting, and suggests as well that in order to help keep the agendas for those two meetings to a reasonable length, the board may wish to move the discussion on community asset transfers to the March meeting instead, and postpone the discussions around what the West Yorkshire Joint Services Safer, Cleaner, Greener until the new municipal year. So once again, if the board are happy with those proposals, then perhaps go on to reflect those changes in the work programme update. And that would leave us with a 3-item agenda for both the February and March meetings. So discussions around building homes for the future, the highways pay review, and the economic inequalities report during the February meeting. And for the March meeting, the local plan stage 2 hearings update, the Towns Deal and future high street funding update, and the community asset transfers item. That's all from me, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alex. Is everyone...
Pardon? I think Councillor Dickinson wants to make a point.
Yeah, go on.
Thanks, Councillor Fenton Glyn. I'm just wondering about the COVID recovery plan, whether we might be a little bit, don't get me wrong, I'm all in one for having a plan, whether February might be actually too soon with what seems to be inevitable ongoing postponements of the return of life. I'm not against the idea of discussing it in February, don't get me wrong, but I'm just wondering whether it might be a little bit too quick off the blocks with not enough data for us to work with to come up with something that's going to be solidly concrete. I mean, I'm open. I'm very much open to ideas. If you want to shout me down, I don't have a problem with that
either. Councillor Smith.
I think I agree, and I feel like if we're doing our the COVID economic inequalities summary or discussion, then it would, I don't know, it doesn't feel like that fits having the recovery plan then afterwards, sort of like, I don't know, it doesn't look like that it's going to give them time to digest anything or include anything. I mean, I don't. I think I'd rather not have it on that month either.
Councillor Fenton Glenn.
So I guess as on a point of what we want to scrutinise, like one of the things that I think is quite useful for us to do is mention things that, you know, might not have been considered or might not be part of considerations. I would rather we didn't start planning for recovery from COVID when COVID is over, because that's probably too late to plan. You know, generally with plans, you like to have them in place beforehand. So I think having it slightly earlier and just having a discussion from an earlier point about, you know, how are we going to look at this? How are we going to approach it? What issues need to be part of that discussion? I feel like is quite a good use of our time and is somewhere where we can contribute. And actually, I think that if we're building on the work that's been done on the economic inequalities stuff, then actually part of what we can do is mainstream that in the broader thinking about how we're going to recover our evening economies, how we're going to recover different parts of the economy from that.
I think it's neither here nor there at this stage. I think we're more talking about the like Councillor Fenton has mentioned, we're almost helping to structure it at this point. I think, Mike.
I think the reason for the proposal for the timing, Chair, is that officers are preparing a report for Cabinet on recovery in March. So this work is going on, and the February timing gives you an opportunity to influence the report that's going to Cabinet in March, and will be scheduled for March, as far as I understand, and a chance for the work that the working group has done on inequalities also to feed into the recovery plan. I mean, I take the point fully that that won't be the end of the recovery plan. That will probably be the start of it. But it is an opportunity for you to influence the report that's going to Cabinet in March.
Fair enough. I can accept that.
Very good.
Can I say one quick thing, and just to say that I've met with Sean, and she's had some of the previous kind of rough points that have come out of the focus groups. So she is going to be including the findings of the economic inequalities within the recovery plan. So it won't be a total surprise when she gets the final report, because she's already seen, you know, some of the raw data to help her formulate what needs to be included in the recovery plan.
Right, okay. Good. Points from me. Three things. Councillor Caffrey's raised about he'd like an agenda item at a future meeting, not sure when, I don't think it's urgent, but about retrospective planning permission. Quite interesting, actually. But I was wondering, could we add it to the work programme, and then can I let Alex liaise with Councillor Caffrey about the actual brief, if that's okay, and then we can bring it back to a future board meeting once we've got some more detail there. Second thing is, one for the work programme, but just as a TBC item, you know, the stuff that the council are doing regarding the health stuff, I think we're up there with being one of the best councils in the country for our health. You know, Debs was on the news night the other night. You know, it's absolutely incredible. And I don't know if we're straying into another scrutiny board here, but it'd be good to put something on the agenda to do with, just because I want it in this panel, to do with health, specifically, you know, like the vaccination centres, all that kind of stuff. Not necessarily at this stage, because I know we're at capacity, but I think that could be a really interesting discussion.
I think that falls under adult health and social care's purview.
Yeah, but you know,
but you want to talk about
it.
Well,
get
you know,
yourself up, George.
I think it's quite an interesting one to have at this board, if I'm honest.
I mean, there's plenty of interesting things. It's just that not all of them are our responsibility to talk about. I'll talk about down the pub if it'll make you happy.
You know, it's just
pubs are open.
It's just a thought, but Mike, I think you're saying it's not part of the panel, aren't you?
Well, indeed, Chair, but for anybody who's interested, there is a report on the vaccination programme at next Thursday's Health and Wellbeing Board, where Kate Horn, who has been seconded from our Public Health Department to work with the CCG on the vaccination programme, is reporting. So there is a written report, and you can either watch that live or the recording if you're interested in that discussion.
Right. Okay. Councillor Gwynne.
Yeah, so this is an unrelated point, but I just wanted to raise it when we're talking about the work programme, which was that this meeting that we've just had was pretty punitive because we had a full agenda and then we had 2 petitions. And I would be interested in members of the board's view, and this kind of came up at our chair and deputy chair meeting the other day, about when we do have, particularly if we've got more than 1 petition, do people want a 4-hour meeting or an extra meeting? And my instinct is actually, and I think particularly the last item, I think suffered a bit from the length of the meeting. So my instinct would be that if it is possible, and for a number of reasons around the budget, it was very difficult this time, but would people prefer us to have an extra meeting in if you've got petition items that are likely to take up a significant chunk of the meeting as well?
May I suggest on the back of that, we've only got 2 meetings left in the work programme. We could actually easily move to a model where we have 2 items per meeting to give us that, because we're getting so many petitions at the moment. If we have 2 items a meeting, then it gives us that flexibility to add a petition in there.
So add in an extra meeting already, and then we go to 2 items a meeting.
Yeah, so
we've got 6 items on the work programme, haven't we?
Yeah, so in future, so after March, which is the last meeting on the work programme, I think, in future, just have 2 items for every place meeting, which will give us that flexibility to slot a petition in there when it comes in.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, yeah.
Councillor Smith?
Yeah, just I think that the people that bring the petitions should have to wait till the very end so that'll put them off bringing all these petitions. In the interest of democracy, of course, they should see what's going on in our scrutiny. But I also wanted to say I really am keen for us to get back on and do, like Alex said, with the transport, you know, the stuff that we were doing around the train. It was just Josh's suggestion around rail travel, but also, I mean, around buses and the impact of COVID on buses, like Sue said. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that it becomes a point of, do we want to wait until after where we can meet in person kind of thing? But I mean, I suppose we're past that point now, though, aren't we?
I think,
yeah.
It would be interesting to do transport as scrutiny in a day. I think it might be slightly problematic because it's very difficult to comment on the past year for some of the reasons that Sue outlined in her question about the bus station.
Yeah.
But looking at going forward, I mean, looking at what, you know, what are the actual bus companies saying? What are they forecasting in light of what Sue said?
Well, they're not looking very happy at all about carrying on. Certainly not the routes that aren't making any money at all and didn't previously, because there's nothing now to subsidise them. So, you know, you have the Halifax to Huddersfield bus route every 15 minutes, and it was pretty well full from first thing in the morning to mid-morning, and then mid-afternoon to 7, 8 in the evening. But that's running half empty. The buses in Leeds, because of social distancing, you can only get half the people on a bus that normally seats 70. So, and they haven't put extra buses on for obvious reasons. So you stand at a bus stop in the city centre for a bus up to the university, and you may get 3 going past saying, bus full due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's disrupting the usage of buses. I mean, I just tend to then walk. But there are real problems. And that the amount of money that people like First Group and Stagecoach are losing is phenomenal. And
yeah,
okay, they're viable in city centres, I think, when this is all over. But I think there's probably a big question mark about smaller towns and smaller villages, where we obviously want to get people on buses, but there are issues. And I think it would probably be worthwhile asking the people from the large providers, even people like the Home for the Tiger, the Small Tiger Cubs group. I mean, TJ Walsh went out of business, I think, God, about November time, because they couldn't manage to keep running even those small access buses around the local area.
Do you want to do a scrutiny review, Sue?
I'm sorry, George.
Do you want to do a scrutiny review on that? You seem passionate.
Well, I'm interested because Michael's in public transport and I get this in my ears all day and some of it sticks. So yeah. I think it would be very useful, yes.
Mike.
Sorry. I was just going to suggest, Chair, that perhaps if she were willing, if the board were willing, Councillor Holdsworth and myself and Alex could have a separate meeting to try and flesh out a proposal.
Yeah, scope something out.
Yep.
Yeah, good idea. And then final thing from me, I'd like to launch a scrutiny review on business grants. I've been receiving quite a lot of emails about it. Now, there's a lot that we can shout about here at a council level. The first grant round was incredibly successful, and you might recall that at the time I praised the council about that. This round has been a bit more challenging, I think it's fair to say, but there's also wider questions about resource, I think. So fair enough, we've been dishing out grant money. What provision have we had to actually, human resource provision to actually allocate that money? You know, what about our systems? It's a massive thing.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting one. So I'd love to do a scrutiny review on it. If I can, I'd love to send you all some more information outside of this. And then let's have an initial meeting outside of this meeting.
I think it's worth looking at. I think we need to be mindful of the reason that a lot of those grants are delayed is because that team is so busy. Yeah. And we need to think about the pressure that we're putting on them. And I mean, it almost comes up in the COVID recovery stuff.
You're right. I think my solution to that is this review could end up being quite a long one. And we can only really do the council end of it after this grant round. But the reason why it's worth starting now is because we can actually do a lot of evidence gathering at this stage. And then we can, at the later stage, once it's all COVID is, I don't feel like it will finish, but once it starts to finish, we can actually do the council communication then.
I mean, with any luck, the electors of Calderdale would have rejected me by that time, but
I don't think so. So, not you, Josh. So if it's okay, I'd like to send you all some information. Then if anyone wants to be part of that working party, then please do. And on that note, I think that's us done, isn't it? Please so I'd just like to say, Fazana, they're not all this long. I'm so sorry. Essentially, we were dumped with 2 petitions on this agenda.
Yeah, I saw.
we would have ordinarily put them on a different agenda, but it's one of these things. But
welcome to the team, Fazana.
Thanks. I was just craving some chocolate, that's all.